Chapter 1028. Milord, you'll understand in the future that de Wissely is a schemer and extremely suspicious. It's impossible to deceive such a top general with ordinary methods. In order to trick him step by step, one must use some extraordinary methods. If my guess is correct, after seeing the formation phenomena of the army and the formation phenomena in the sky, de Wissely's suspicions should have dissipated and he should have begun to cultivate. Wang Chong stood up from the giant rock and lightly jumped down, his expression relaxed. If you want a lion to take the bait, you must let the lion eat the meat, and the hook must be buried in the meat. Cheng Qianli was taken aback, but then he understood. The Six Mysteries version of formation phenomena. This thought flashed through Wang Chong's mind. This was the content of the letter he had sent to de Wissely. In the apocalyptic era, although the earth had withered and the people had been plunged into misery and suffering, martial arts had reached an unprecedented peak. In the process of the emergence of the formation phenomena, countless geniuses had contributed their own wisdom and researched different versions of it. Among all the versions of formation phenomena, there was one that everyone in the apocalyptic era knew of. It was the version developed by a recluse called Master Lucien. To a certain extent, the fame of this version even surpassed the true version of formation phenomena. The reason for this was not because this version of formation phenomena was powerful, nor was it because there was something special about it. Rather, it was because it was the most misleading version of all the later versions of formation phenomena. In the early stages of the research and development of formation phenomena, there were many difficulties and many problems, and the progress was unsatisfactory. There were even many people who believed that formation phenomena had already been lost and that it was impossible for them to reappear. It was at this time that the Six Mysteries version of formation phenomena appeared. The obvious enhancement effect and the vast phenomena left everyone gasping in amazement. Many martial artists who were studying formation phenomena put down their work and went over in admiration. After the initial verification of the Six Mysteries version of formation phenomena, this version was rapidly disseminated in the army, and esteemed Six Mysteries was also greatly praised. Because of this version, the research and development of formation phenomena came to a complete halt. At that time, everyone believed that formation phenomena had finally seen the light of day and that the Six Mysteries version was the ultimate form. But soon, this version of formation phenomena revealed its massive natural flaw and terrifying consequences. It was as if there was a path that led straight to the top of the mountain in a dense forest filled with thorns. Everyone's joy was imaginable, but no one expected that this path would lead to a high cliff. After cultivating formation phenomena for 1 to 3 months, the various consequences of the Six Mysteries version began to appear, including chaotic stellar energy, knotted meridians, and reversed blood qi flow. After a period of time, the symptoms rapidly worsened, and in the end, a large number of people who cultivated formation phenomena began to suffer from cultivation deviation, their bodies becoming paralyzed. This scene shocked everyone, and the army issued an urgent order to stop all cultivation of the Six Mysteries version of formation phenomena. But the consequences had already been created. At the beginning, everyone believed that there was some flaw in the Six Mysteries version of formation phenomena, and everyone invested their intelligence in the hope of finding the problem and fixing the flaw. But reality was completely different from what they had imagined. The more they studied the Six Mysteries version of formation phenomena, the more they discovered that it had an innate flaw that could not be fixed. It had completely led everyone onto a different path, and they would never be able to reach the true end. The deeper they cultivated, the higher their strength increased, the greater the disaster they would suffer, to the point where it was difficult to turn back, and they had completely lost the chance to turn back. More and more people discovered the flaw in the Six Mysteries version of formation phenomena, and in the end, even esteemed Six Mysteries discovered the problem. Esteemed Six Mysteries was filled with guilt. Although he had good intentions and hadn't intended for this to happen, the damage he had caused was beyond his wildest imagination. No one blamed him, but not long after, esteemed Six Mysteries disappeared without a trace, and no one knew where he had gone. After the Six Mysteries version of formation phenomena, everyone learned their lesson and began their research anew. Although it had taken a long time and been delayed by esteemed 6 mysteries matter, with everyone's combined strength, the ancient power of formation phenomena had seen the light of day once more. A person like de Wisely was as cunning as a fox, and if he wasn't given some benefits, he would never take the bait. More importantly, Wang Chong knew that long before the apocalypse, de Wisely had sent people into the interior to search for those people who were researching formation phenomena and rob them. Later on, when the 6 mysteries version of formation phenomena appeared, de Wisely had been one of the people who had actively cultivated it. For a person who was so obsessed with formation phenomena to encounter the 6 mysteries version of formation phenomena, the effects could be imagined. Now that Wang Chong had given him the 6 mysteries version of formation phenomena, it would be strange if de Wisely could hold back. If everything went as expected, once de Wisely began to cultivate it, the flaws of the 6 mysteries version would begin to show on de Wisely. This celestial wolf great general of the Western Turks would find it difficult to maintain his peak great general level. Everything had been decided the moment de Wisely had kidnapped Chin Bin. All that was left was to wait for the final result. So de Wisely was already part of your plan. Since this is the case, I will report this to Lord Protector General in a little while. In the future, there will be no need to send anyone to investigate the Western Turks. Cheng Qianli's expression relaxed, and he paused for a moment before continuing. That's right, there's another matter. A special guest has come to the city of Talas. Lord Protector General has asked me to invite you over. Wang Chong froze, his curiosity piqued. Talas was currently a dangerous place for military strategists, and he truly had no idea who would come at a time like this, much less make Gao Xinji send Cheng Qianli to invite him. Let's go. The mood in the main hall of Talas was solemn. The moment Wang Chong stepped in, he immediately saw the guest that Cheng Qianli had spoken of. But even though Wang Chong had mentally prepared himself, he still couldn't help but be flabbergasted at the sight of this guest. The guest that Cheng Qianli spoke of was around 1.8 meters tall, with a slender figure, deep blue eyes, long wavy hair, and a thick beard. He stood out like a sore thumb in the hall. In terms of appearance, this person was completely different from the Tang people. On the contrary, he was rather similar to the greatest foe of the Tang dynasty, the Arabs. But a moment later, Wang Chong's eyes flickered as he glanced at the cloth this person was wearing, a thought flitting through his mind. Lord Protector General, this is... Wang Chong turned his head to Gao Xinji, who was seated at a long table in the hall, a questioning look in his eyes. Wang Chong, you've come at just the right time. Not too long ago, this person charged into the city and was almost mistaken for an Arab and killed by our men. This person kept shouting and acting strangely, so we went to find Wan Shuyang. Wan Shuyang told us that he was not an Arab, but a Khorasani, and that he had important information to tell us. But he always emphasized that he would only speak if he saw you. Otherwise, he would rather die than speak. Oh! A hint of surprise flashed through Wang Chong's eyes, and he quickly turned to the Khorasani. As expected, when he had first seen this person, Wang Chong had already guessed that he really was a Khorasani. But there was one thing that Wang Chong did not understand. Khorasan was extremely far to the west of Talas, and it was one of the heartland of the Arabian Empire. Even the merchants of the Tang dynasty on the Silk Road rarely went there, much less Wang Chong. Wang Chong truly did not understand how these Khorasani, whom he had never interacted with, knew of him and insisted on meeting him. Marquis, I've asked around. He truly is a Khorasani. I traveled there in my early years, and the Khorasani are different from the Arabs. He might really be able to provide us with some assistance. A familiar voice rang out beside his ear. It was Yuan Shusong, who was dressed in a loose robe and had a cultured and refined aura. You are that young commander of the Tang dynasty? At this moment, the statue-like Khorasani in the hall suddenly spoke, his green eyes staring at Wang Chong. Wan Shuyang was taken aback, and he quickly took on the role of translator. You know of me? Wang Chong nodded in surprise. No. To his surprise, the Khorasani shook his head. But I've heard of you. You defeated the governor of Iron and Blood Abu Muslim at Talas. Abu Muslim is an important minister of Arabia and also the foe of our Khorasan. He has never suffered a defeat in his life and has destroyed countless countries. For you to defeat him means that you are a supreme hero. Wang Chong froze for a moment, and then he began to smile. This was the first time he had heard such a high evaluation from a Khorasani to the west of the Tsong Mountains. Our people said that you wanted to see me and that you have extremely important information. What is this information you speak of? Wang Chong got straight to the point. Abu Muslim is our foe. It was he who led the Arab army to destroy our Sassanid dynasty. While you were fighting with the Arabs on the front lines, the Arab Mamelukes and other soldiers were slaughtering our people in the rear. All of Khorasan is littered with corpses. You and us, we have a common enemy. The tall and thin Khorasani said, his eyes red. Everyone in the hall glanced at each other in surprise. No one had expected such a thing to happen in Khorasan behind the Arabs. As for what Wang Chong had sensed, few people in this era knew of Khorasan. As for the Sassanid dynasty, very few people, including Gao Xianji, knew of it. But Wang Chong knew that at another time, this name had a thunderous and even more illustrious name, Persia. But what moved Wang Chong the most was not this. Rather, it was the words that the Khorasani had mentioned. The Mamluk army. No wonder I haven't seen them. They were suppressing the Khorasani uprising in the rear. Chapter 1029. In Wang Chong's memories, the Mamelukes, the strongest force of cavalry on the continent, should have appeared here during the Battle of Talas. But because of his interference, Gao Xianji's entry into the city of Talas, the battle had begun much earlier, and the behemoth army had appeared while the Mamelukes had remained in the rear to suppress the Khorasani uprising. Everything had gone completely awry. And Khorasan was unquestionably another variable. The Arabs are extremely ambitious, and their thirst for war and conquest knows no bounds. This time, it was our Sassanid dynasty that fell, and next time, it will be your eastern world. Talas is only the beginning, not the end. The Khorasani continued, his expression extremely solemn. In the hall, Wang Chong and Gao Xianji discreetly glanced at each other. This Khorasani truly was rather special. His judgment of the Arabs was exactly the same as that of Wang Chong and Gao Xianji. What do you hope to obtain? Wang Chong suddenly asked. I hope that we can work together to deal with the Arabs. The tall and thin Khorasani sternly said. All of you might not know this, but although Abu Muslim has been temporarily defeated, he has already begun to recruit new soldiers. One of the strongest governors of Arabia, the governor of War, Qutayba, and governor of Cairo, Osman, have already led soldiers to Talas to reinforce Abu Muslim. Qutayba has an illustrious reputation in Arabia, and he is even stronger than Abu Muslim. All the countries he has conquered, from top to bottom, have been slaughtered, leaving no one alive. More importantly, they have many fierce generals under their command, and their soldiers are extremely powerful. With the soldiers of these two people and Abu Muslims, in the next battle, you will see at least 400,000 soldiers at Talas. Buzz. Everyone in the hall, including Wang Chong and Gao Xianji, paled at these words. In the last war, the Tang dynasty, the Uzun, the Western Turks, and the Arabs had all suffered grievous losses. If Abu Muslim only had this small number of soldiers, he wouldn't have much of an effect on the Tang dynasty, but if the three sides joined forces and the Arabs mustered another 400,000 soldiers, this war would become extremely disadvantageous to the Tang. At the very least, the Tang dynasty's forces at Talas could not deal with 400,000 Arab soldiers. Moreover, one Abu Muslim was already very difficult to deal with. If two more Arab governors came, they wouldn't even dare to think about it. In addition, Abu Muslim's defeat has attracted the attention of the Caliph. Before, he had only treated you as an ordinary country of the East, but now that Qutayba and Osman had arrived, it was clear that the Caliph now viewed you as Arabia's strongest foe. The only time three governors working together on an expedition to the east is when the Arabs conquered our Sassanid dynasty. The tall and thin Khorasani sternly said. Khorasan was now part of Arabia's territory. In the Arabian Empire, which spanned more than 10 million square kilometers, Khorasan was definitely one of its core regions. It was possible to gather information that the Tang dynasty could not. In addition, The Arabs are warlike by nature and cannot accept defeat. You have already stimulated their ambition to conquer the East. Many Arab governors are already paying attention to this place. If you cannot hold Talas and completely defeat Qutayba and Abu Muslim, then many more governors will follow. Their soldiers will continue to pour into the East until they conquer the entire Eastern world. Rumble. The Khorasani's words immediately set off a massive uproar in the hall. Bastard! These Arabs are too arrogant. Do they think that the Tang dynasty is one of those small countries they've encountered before? If not for Goguryeo, Uzun, Mengshi Zhao, and the Eastern and Western Turkic Khaganates holding them back, would the Tang dynasty be unable to deal with Abu Muslim? Arabia has many governors, but does the Tang dynasty not have any other great generals? The Crown Prince's Grand Guardian Wang Zhongxi is still in the capital. The Tong Luo still has 20,000 elite cavalry, and the capital has 100,000 imperial army soldiers. Does the Arabs think that the Tang dynasty is one of those small countries? If it weren't for the fact that we can't mobilize our soldiers, the Arabs would be nothing. The generals in the hall were seething with rage. Only Wang Chong and Gao Xinji remained silent, their hearts heavy. The Tang dynasty did not lack soldiers, nor did it lack top-class great generals. The anger of these generals also illustrated the predicament that the Tang dynasty was in. It had far too many enemies. 80% of the 600,000 soldiers and great generals of the Tang dynasty were tied up on the border. The people of the Central Plains were farmers, completely different from the nomadic tribes of the Turks and Arabs. The armies of the Central Plains were primarily defensive, and their greater responsibility was to protect the ordinary people who farmed. They were not like the Turks and Arabs, who lived and died in battle, whose mission was to expand and conquer. The Arabs could mobilize a large number of soldiers in a single battle, 60 to 80% of their forces. But the Tang dynasty was different. It was already quite impressive that they could mobilize 2 imperial great generals for a war on the border. This was a fact that had not changed in Wang Chong's memories, not even after several thousand years had passed. How do you wish for us to work together? Wang Chong suddenly asked, his voice solemn. Wang Chong had never interacted with the Khorasani before, but Wang Chong had heard of them. The Khorasani were brave, warlike, and fearless of death. The fact that they were able to stubbornly resist decades after being conquered by the Arabs was proof enough. In the areas conquered by the Arabs, this sort of situation was extremely rare. In Khorasan, our Sassanid dynasty still has one last force, around 8,000 Aswaran cataphracts. This is the strongest force of our Sassanid dynasty and the force that the Arabs most desire to find and destroy. The reason they mobilized the Mamluks is to deal with our Aswaran cataphracts. After a few moments of silence, the tall and thin Khorasani suddenly said something that no one expected. Towards the end of the Arab conquest of our Sassanid dynasty, the emperor, for the sake of restoring the dynasty, personally ordered the Aswaran cataphracts to go into hiding. Thus, even after the fall of the empire, the Arabs were never able to find this legendary force of heavy cavalry of the Sassanid dynasty. This was a sore point for the caliph. In the last few decades, no matter how many soldiers the Arabs have stationed in Khorasan, we have always been able to deal them a heavy blow. The Aswaran cataphracts are our last force and cannot be mobilized lightly. But if you can defeat the Arabs at Talas, defeat Qutayba, Abu Muslim, and Osman, we can mobilize the Aswaran cataphracts and coordinate with you to deal them a heavy blow when they retreat. Boom! The moment the tall and thin Khorasani spoke, the voice of the Stone of Destiny rang out in Wang Chong's ears. Side mission, Aswaran cataphracts, begin. This is the last force of the Sassanid dynasty and the greatest reliance of the Khorasani. It has been tempered by fire and blood, and it has achieved countless glories. This is the last bloodline of a dynasty. User has defeated Abu Muslim and dealt a heavy blow to the Arabs, drawing their attention. This is the last hope of the Khorasani. The Khorasani wish to ally with the Tang dynasty, but they are also cautious. Only by completing the second mission and defeating the Arabs will User be able to obtain the final trust of the Khorasani. In the future, this will be User's firmest ally in the western regions and the Tsong Mountains. For mission success, User will be rewarded with 2,000 points of destiny energy and the assistance of the legendary Aswaran cataphracts. For mission failure, 4,000 points of destiny energy will be deducted. In addition, the world shackles will be added to the list. Note, there is only one chance. If the mission fails, user will no longer have any contact with the Khorasani. This is the first and last time that the Khorasani will extend an olive branch of goodwill to the Tang dynasty. The voice continued to howl down like a waterfall, but no one but Wang Chong could hear it. Wang Chong stood there in a daze, completely dumbfounded. This was not because of the Stone of Destiny's voice, but because of the information it had revealed. The Aswaran cataphracts. They could definitely rank in the top 3 of the continent's cavalry. As a nomadic and warlike people, the Sassanid dynasty shared many similarities with the Arabian Empire, including the strength of their cavalry. Before Wang Chong ascended to the position of Grand Marshal of the world and became the war saint, he had read about the various factions and civilizations, including the fallen Sassanid dynasty. The strongest cavalry of the Sassanid dynasty were the Aswaran cataphracts, just like the Mamelukes of the Arabian Empire. The two were different methods of achieving the same result, and they were equally powerful in battle. There was even a rumor that the Mamluks had borrowed a lot of inspiration from the nearby Aswaran cataphracts of the Sassanid dynasty. This was because the Aswaran cataphracts had been established and flourished much earlier than the Mamluks. But in Wang Chong's understanding, this most powerful force of the Sassanid dynasty had vanished decades ago, buried in the dust of history. But Wang Chong had never imagined that he would hear news of the Aswaran cataphracts in this manner. Wang Chong said nothing, only glanced at Gao Xianji, both of them seeing the same meaning in each other's eyes. The Tang dynasty had just experienced a major war in the southwest and was currently short on soldiers. No matter what sort of request the Khorasani had, it would have no effect on the Tang dynasty. Moreover, if they could obtain the help of these Khorasani, they would be able to plant a nail in the heart of the Arabian Empire, allowing them to obtain at any time a large amount of information that the Tang dynasty currently lacked. Yuan Qing, make arrangements to take him away and receive him well. In addition, Sir Yuan, please tell him that we agree to his request for an alliance. I am confident that the Tang dynasty and the Sassanid dynasty will be able to establish a firm friendship. Chapter 1030. Translated by Hypersheep 325. Shi Yuanqing and Wan Shuyang had already brought the Khorasani into the inner hall, where he was received by Shi Yuanqing and Wan Shuyang. After asking him a few questions, the Khorasani was quietly escorted out of the city. Wang Chong, you also heard what that Khorasani said. The situation is not good for us. After sending off the Khorasani, Gao Xianji sat down in front of his desk, his brow tightly furrowed in concern. Everyone had seen just how powerful Abu Muslim was. One of his punches could even contend against the giant ape. Add in 2 governors of the same level and even more soldiers, and the current state of Talas would not be able to hold out against such a force. Wang Chong said nothing, but his eyes were also filled with concern. How could he not know what Gao Xianji had said? The Arabs could mobilize far more soldiers than the Tang dynasty could. We only have 2 choices at the moment. The first option was to immediately withdraw and return to the Great Tang before the Arabs arrived in force. Given the current strength of Daluan Ruozan and the Western Turks, we will find it very difficult to stop them. Gao Xianji said, but if we do this, we will lose the city of Talas. This strategic fortress is at the throat of the Arabs' eastward advance. Once we leave, it will be very difficult to find such a strategic location. Moreover, once we cross the Tsong Mountains, we will enter the interior of Anxi. Right now, we have to stop the Arabs at Talas so that nothing changes in the western regions, but once the Arabs enter Anxi, it's hard to say if the kingdoms of the western regions will still be able to maintain their neutrality. Wang Chong shook his head. How could he not have thought of what Gao Xianji said? However, this path simply wasn't feasible. At Talas, the Arabs were currently facing only Arabia, the Western Turks, and the Uzan. But if they retreated to the western regions, the Tang dynasty would have to face the kingdoms of the western regions as well. At that time, the situation was probably even worse than it was now. Sigh, I wanted to discuss it with you, but you've already thought of it. On the way to Talas, you should have seen that the entire western regions is in chaos. Talas has not yet been defeated, and I am still here, but the western regions are already like this. If we retreat to the western regions, the countries will only become more chaotic. They might even be bribed by the Arabs to attack us, just like the Karluks. At that time, we will truly have internal and external troubles. The Tang dynasty has been operating in the western regions for more than 200 years. In the end, it proved that everyone's rule was a failure. After saying this, Gao Xianji raised his head and let out a long sigh, revealing a deep sense of frustration and disappointment. He had been operating in the western regions for 10-some years and had been hailed as the Anxi war god, but after the Battle of Talas, he had been unable to recruit anyone other than a few mercenaries. Among all the countries, no one was willing to join the war and help the Tang dynasty. On the contrary, once the Tang dynasty retreated to the western regions, they might defect to the Arabs. This was truly a failure. How could someone as proud as Gao Xianji endure this? Wang Chang's lips parted, but he hesitated. The Tang dynasty was still too soft on the western regions. There was a saying that went, "The who fear might, but they do not cherish virtue." The people of the Central Plains had spent several thousand years to understand this morality. Benevolence and righteousness prevailed in the Central Plains, and it was taken for granted that the people of the western regions would be like the Central Plains, benevolent and righteous. This was completely wishful thinking. In the western regions, there was only one law: strength is revered. The countries of the western regions only needed to attach themselves to the strongest person. As for softness and benevolence, they had no meaning to them. They were two different civilizations, yet they took it for granted. It would be strange if they could succeed. But with a war at hand, this was not the time to discuss such matters. Moreover, there were many reasons for the policy of softness in the western regions, and Gao Xianji could not be completely blamed for it. "My lord, there is no need to blame yourself. The Tang dynasty has not reached that level, and we may not necessarily lose this war. As for the matter of Anxi, it is not too late to consider it after this war is over." Wang Chong comforted him. Gao Xianji nodded, quickly regaining his composure. He had always been calm and composed in front of outsiders, rarely revealing his inner weaknesses, even in front of Cheng Qianli and Feng Chongqing. To be able to say these words to Wang Chong, he clearly regarded Wang Chong as a peer, a confidant with whom he could discuss many issues. Although Cheng Qianli and Feng Chongqing were not bad and had their own talents, when it came to the art of war, deployment, martial arts, and strategy, they were still a little lacking. So when Gao Xianji talked in front of them, he still held back a little. Only Wang Chong could make Gao Xianji treat him so calmly and divulge everything, no matter how big or small. The situation truly hasn't reached that stage yet. But for us, Talas is far better than the western regions for the decisive battle. Moreover, once we retreat to the western regions, the Arabs can take a detour at any time and advance into Longxi or the interior, which is even more disadvantageous to us. No matter what, we cannot leave Talas. Gao Xianji sternly said. Thus, there is only one path left. We must report the situation to the imperial court as quickly as possible and request reinforcements. Wang Chong nodded. He and Gao Xianji shared the same view on this point. Abu Muslim was the Arab governor of the east, and he commanded the soldiers of a region, just like the Anxi Protectorate Army and the Qixi Protectorate of the Tang dynasty. But if other governors were added to the mix, the situation would be completely different. Based on what that Khorasani had said, Qutayba commanded the soldiers of the north, equivalent to Abu Muslim. And there was also Governor Osman of Cairo. Moreover, the Caliph of Arabia was preparing to send the Mamluks. The nature of this battle had completely changed at this moment. The war had officially escalated from a local war to a large-scale frontal battle between armies. The Arabs had gathered at least 30 to 40% of their soldiers. Just the soldiers of Wang Chong and Gao Xianji were far from enough to deal with such a massive force. Lord Protector General and I coincidentally share the same view. But my seniority in the army is too shallow, and I simply cannot persuade the imperial court. I fear that I will require Lord Protector General's cooperation in this matter. Wang Chong sternly said. Be at ease. I will join you in writing a grievous complaint. This battle is of the utmost importance. Just like that Khorasani said, the Arabs have boundless ambitions. If they can capture Talas, the Arabs will have allies in Uzan and the Western Turks to the east of the Tsong Mountains, and then all the Arab armies will march east. The Tang dynasty will probably encounter a foe it has not encountered in centuries. Gao Xianji worriedly said. As an outstanding great general, Gao Xianji had a sharper and more far-sighted vision than many others. I am only worried that the ministers of the court have not participated in the battle and simply do not understand the gravity of this battle, nor do they understand what awaits us if we lose this battle. At that time, it will not be as simple as winning the Battle of Talas. When a tiger shows an opening, the pack of wolves will pounce. Moreover, there are also people from King Qi's faction in the court, and they love to scheme and scheme, even more than the safety of the country. Based on their past behavior, I'm afraid that they will definitely think of all kinds of ways to obstruct us from submitting the petition. In addition, the imperial court currently has no soldiers to use. Gao Xianji gave a deep sigh. For the Battle of Talas, he had sent several dozen letters requesting reinforcements from the imperial court. In the end, only Wang Chong's Qixi Protectorate, Wushang's cavalry, and the soldiers the imperial court had mobilized had arrived with a total of only 60,000 soldiers. As for the other 60,000 soldiers, they had all been hired from the western regions by Wang Chong at great expense. Given his status as Anxi Protector General and his 2 months of work, this was all he had gotten. One could easily imagine the situation the Tang dynasty was in. Wang Chong fell silent. In a flash, the hall was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. He naturally understood the problem Gao Xianji was talking about, but the Tang dynasty was not Arabia. They had far too many restraints. The Tang dynasty had many enemies on its borders, and if the armies of the various countries were added together, they would probably number 2 to 3 million. It was already quite impressive that the Tang dynasty could use this number of soldiers to hold them down. Not only that, just as Gao Xianji had said, King Qi was still a massive obstacle. It seems like I can't keep him around any longer. Wang Chong quietly said to himself, a thought suddenly flashing through his mind. If the Tang dynasty wanted to revive and survive the calamity, King Qi's faction would always be a massive obstacle. For the first time, Wang Chong felt that King Qi was a massive threat. Whether it was for the Central Plains or the Tang dynasty, King Qi could no longer remain in the imperial court. Lord Protector General, be at ease. Even if King Qi's faction obstructs the imperial court, I have my own ways to resolve the matter. I just need Lord Protector General to prepare 2 letters for me. Seeing Gao Xianji's curious and inquisitive gaze, Wang Chong did not hide anything. The other letter is for my grandfather. Gao Xianji froze for a moment before understanding dawned on him, and a look of respect appeared on his face. Duke Jiao of the Tang dynasty was the prime minister of the Golden Age, a minister who had once served the emperor. At the same time, he was an important minister who had worked together with the Holy Emperor to forge the glory of the Tang dynasty. There was no one in the world who did not know of his name. If Duke Jiao were to step forward, the situation would truly be different. Gao Xianji said sincerely. The world had witnessed Duke Jiao's achievements back then. Without his dedicated assistance, the great Tang would have found it very difficult to achieve the golden age of the world's #1 and the world's tributes. Moreover, Duke Jiao's achievements weren't limited to politics and governance. He had also made outstanding contributions to the military. As a virtuous minister, Duke Jiao had played a major role in the long-term stability of the Tang dynasty. More importantly, if not for the Holy Emperor's efforts to salvage the situation and hope that Duke Jiao would continue to assist him in the name of the people, Duke Jiao would have already retired long ago. But even so, Duke Jiao rarely interfered in the affairs of the Four Quarters Embassy. Unless it was an extremely important matter, Duke Jiao would never interfere. Chapter 1031. Lord Protector General, in the current situation, we can only transfer soldiers from the border. You have great seniority in the army and have dealings with the other Protector Generals. I wonder if you can get some soldiers from the other protector generals? Wang Chong said. The army of the Tang dynasty was a mixture of Hu and Han, and Wang Chong's status was too sensitive. Because of his background, Gao Xinji was more likely to speak to him than Wang Chong. Moreover, he had great seniority in the army and had dealings with the generals and protector generals of the various regions. In this aspect, not even Wang Chong, who was a genius in the art of war, could compare to him. The Biting Protectorate currently has the most soldiers, and I have some dealings with Biting Protector General and Sishun. I'll negotiate with him on this matter. If the Biting Protectorate only has a small number of soldiers, we should be able to borrow them. I estimate that we should be able to get 4,000 to 6,000 soldiers. Gao Xianji said after a few moments of thought. If we can only borrow 4,000 to 6,000 soldiers, then we'll transfer the most elite soldiers. This way, the Biting Protectorate won't be too affected. Wang Chong sternly said. Gao Xinji nodded. Quality over quantity was the most important factor in soldiers. He shared the same view as Wang Chong. Moreover, the Anxi Protectorate army had been carefully selected from the soldiers of the various regions of the Tang dynasty. If quantity was not an issue, then quality was an issue that Gao Xianji had always adhered to. There's also Geshu Han. He's garrisoned in Longxi. Other than the Biting Protectorate, he's the closest to us. Moreover, the Big Dipper army has astonishing fighting power. They should be able to provide us with some assistance. Gao Xinji was quiet for a few moments, a hint of hesitation in his eyes. But I rarely interact with Geshu Han, so I'm afraid that it'll be very difficult to convince him. Leave this matter to me. Wang Chong smiled. He already knew what was going on. Of all the Hu generals, Geshu Han could be said to be the most unique. He had admired the culture of the Central Plains from a young age, and he spoke with a perfect capital accent that was even better than his own. He was promoted by the Crown Prince's junior protector, Wang Zhongxi. Although he joined the army late, he was promoted very quickly because he had the support of the war god of the Tang dynasty. In addition, unlike the other Hu, where most of the soldiers were Hu, Geshu Han's Big Dipper army had over 90% Han soldiers. This was completely different from the others. Thus, on the surface, whether it was Gao Xianji, Fomin Linta, and Sishun, or the other Hu generals, although they all had dealings with Geshu Han, there was a slight estrangement in their hearts. Geshu Han was well aware of this fact, so he rarely interacted with them. He would never contact them unless absolutely necessary. I still have some friendship with Geshu Han. I should be able to get some soldiers from him. Wang Chong said. Gao Xianji was flabbergasted, but then he thought of something and understood. In the battle between the Big Dipper army and White Lion Great General Witadra Konglo, the Big Dipper army had suffered heavy losses. Many people knew that Wang Chong had gifted 10,000 high-quality Turkic warhorses to Geshu Han. Geshu Han's Big Dipper army only had 20,000 some soldiers in total. Wang Chong's gift of 10,000 horses to him was like sending charcoal in snowy weather. In this aspect, Geshu Han owed him a favor. But even so, we still don't have enough men. Gao Xianji raised his head to the heavens and sighed. Even if he could get 6,000 soldiers from the Biting Protectorate and 3,000 from Geshu Han, he would only have 9,000 soldiers. This was a drop in the bucket for the current war. Lord Protector General, there will always be a way out. The Tang dynasty is still the Tang dynasty, and it's still far from being at the end of its rope. Right now, it's just that the other sides are holding back its soldiers, not that it has no soldiers to use. As long as we make some adjustments, we'll be able to get quite a few soldiers. The Tang dynasty has no soldiers to use, but didn't I bring 100,000 soldiers with me? The urgent task at hand is to discuss how to report to the imperial court. To Gao Xinji's surprise, Wang Chong smiled. You're right. Gao Xinji froze for a moment, and then he began to smile. Time slowly passed, and the two highest commanders of the Tang dynasty in Talas continued to discuss the details from night to dawn. After discussing for an entire night, the two finally went to sleep. Voila! Soon, at daybreak, eagles began to fly out of Talas in every direction. Translated by Hypersheep 325 Flap Flap. As the place closest to Talas, Feng Changqing was the first to receive the news. Enlist soldiers from the countries of the western regions. When Feng Changqing opened the letter and saw that it was written by Gao Xianji himself, he froze. The contents of Gao Xianji's letter were extremely simple. He hoped that Feng Changqing would use the name of the Anxi Protectorate Army and the Tang dynasty to enlist soldiers from the countries of the western regions. In return, the Anxi Protectorate Army would heavily reward the countries with gold after victory. How much gold and silver does Anxi have right now? When Feng Changqing saw this letter, he smiled bitterly in his heart. As Gao Xianji's chief advisor for administration and logistics, no one understood Anxi's current situation better than Feng Changqing. Although it had conquered the wealthy Shi kingdom, a significant portion of its wealth had been taken away through the tunnels by the nobles of the Shi kingdom. As a result, the Anxi Protectorate Army's harvest was far less than the rumors claimed. After the war, at least half of the wealth had been offered to the imperial court and imperial household by Gao Xianji, and nearly half of the rest had been given to Bian Lingxing by Gao Xianji. Bian Lingxing was an important aide to Gao Xianji's career, but he was extremely greedy. Just this little bit of wealth was not enough to satisfy him. As for the last quarter, Gao Xianji kept a portion for himself and distributed the rest to the soldiers of the Anxi Protectorate Army, as well as the Karluks and Ferganians who had accompanied the army. Thus, the Anxi Protectorate Army had no more money to recruit soldiers. If not for this, Feng Changqing would not have been so helpless in the rear. The countries of the western regions have always been greedy, and there's no one who doesn't like gold and silver. Although I can trick them into enlisting some soldiers, once the war is over, the Anxi Protectorate Army won't be able to take out this sum of money. Feng Changqing worriedly looked at the letter in his hand. The recruitment that Gao Xianji had mentioned was a private recruitment by the Anxi Protectorate Army. It had not been approved by the Bureau of Military Personnel and was not part of the plan. The imperial court would not pay for it, so the Anxi Protectorate Army could only think of a way. The countries of the western regions didn't have many soldiers in the first place, and they wouldn't be able to recruit many. If this was left as a source of gossip, the Anxi Protectorate Army would lose all its prestige in the western regions. Even if they won, it would leave behind many problems. In Feng Changqing's view, this was not a good idea. A moment later, when Feng Changqing saw the last line of the letter, he froze. Changqing, there's no need to worry. The young Marquis has already made arrangements for the money needed for recruitment. The young Marquis has already stated everything in his letter. It was such a simple line of words, but it immediately stunned Feng Changqing. When had the Protector General become so close to Wang Chong? Hadn't there been a gap between them before? And what was going on with the money needed for recruitment? What did it mean that Wang Chong had already stated everything in his letter? Feng Changqing was stunned for a moment, but he quickly realized what was going on. Could it be that Talas had not sent one letter, but two? Feng Changqing flipped through the envelope, and sure enough, he found another letter underneath the original envelope. The handwriting on this letter was completely different from Gao Xianji's. Although it was crooked and twisted, it still had a vigorous demeanor. It was the young Marquis. Feng Changqing quickly took up the letter and began to read through it. At the start, Feng Changqing was only casually skimming through the letter, but as he read, he became more and more serious, his expression more and more solemn. He even read through the letter 3 or 4 times. Demand war reparations from the Arabs and use the war reparations to pay the recruitment fees of the countries of the western regions. Young Marty, to think that you could think of such a method, but there's no better plan than this. Feng Changqing slammed the letter on the table and couldn't help but laugh. He had always believed that his governance of the western regions was unconventional, but he had never imagined that Wang Chong would be even more unconventional. After the victory of a war, he would demand reparations from the losing side to make up for the losses suffered in the war. This sort of method had never been used in the Tang dynasty, and Wang Chong had called it using war to raise war. Wang Chong had made it very clear in his letter that if the Tang dynasty lost the western regions and the countries of the western regions surrendered to Arabia, there would naturally be no need to worry about the issue of recruitment fees. And if they won, they could further demand money from the Arabs to pay the compensation to the countries of the western regions. Thus, the problem that Feng Changqing was worried about was completely non-existent. The Tang dynasty had operated in the western regions for more than 200 years, and now was the time for the countries of the western regions to fight for the Tang dynasty and pay a little. Young Marquis, let's do as you say. Feng Changqing's eyes were bright as he quickly took a brush made of wolf hair from a nearby brush rack and began to write on the paper. Flap flap. Carrier pigeons flew through the sky, following the Silk Road eastward. Soon, they reached the border of Qixi, where several eagles broke off from the flock and shot down. It's finally about to begin. Chapter 1032. In just half a month's time, under Su Hanshan's training, these hooligans, who had been like a plate of loose sand, had immediately transformed into the most qualified warriors. This was something that even Wang Bei couldn't help but feel admiration for. This person seemed to have the most outstanding talent as a general. It was able to train the most ordinary martial artist into a useful warrior. Not only that, Su Hanshan had even used his own connections and enticement to recruit even more bandits and bandits. Right now, Qixi had a new army of nearly 20,000 bandits and bandits. Release! Su Hanshan unsheathed his sword and swung it down. In an instant, the new army of 20,000 bandits and bandits crouched down, knocked their bows, took aim, and pulled the trigger. Boom boom boom. The 4,000 Tang dynasty ballistae, along with the 1,000 ballistae operated by the scions of the capital, fired. 5,000 ballista bolts shot out like lightning bolts, piercing through the bull-eye. The powerful force of the bolts shattered the target. Not bad. Not far away, Wang Hua secretly nodded when he saw this scene. At this speed, in another month, this ballista army will be able to be put to use, and their training will be over. Wang Bei had been born into a clan of ministers and generals, and he had been influenced by his surroundings since childhood. He had seen all sorts of generals, and the nurturing of his clan had made him naturally superior to others in the art of war. Ordinary individuals were nothing in his eyes. But Su Hanshan was different. This was the first time he had seen someone with such astonishing talent, a talent that not even the titled generals of the Tang dynasty could compare to. This talent was at least that of a brigadier general, perhaps even a great general. Just what sort of people did little brother recruit? Wang Bei mentally sighed. At this moment, he suddenly understood why Wang Chong had left Su Hanshan in the rear to guard Qixi with him. Hiya! Wang Bei's eyes flashed, and he quickly regained his composure. Urging his horse's abdomen, he galloped toward the other end of the training ground. Nay! Several hundred zhang away from the ballista army, a Wushang horseman with a powerful aura galloped across the practice field, stirring up a cloud of dust. These Wushang cavalrymen were extremely obedient, and the aura they exuded was completely different from that of the ballistae. Wang Chong led the army to Talas, and the second group of 6,000 Wushang cavalry smoothly arrived at Qixi from Wushang, all thanks to Su Yiqin. The Battle of Talas was no trifling matter, as it concerned the fate of the country and the common people. Thus, after Su Yiqin's harsh words, Wushang village had dispatched a much stronger force than before, and quite a few imperial martial villagers from Wushang village had joined the army. The strength of the Wushang villagers was undeniable, but they still lacked systematic military training, which was what they were doing now. Stop! Suddenly, a steely and determined voice came from the cloud of dust, and a black Turkic horse emerged from the 6,000 Wushang cavalry and galloped toward Wang Bei. General Wang, what business do you have? Cui Piaoqi stopped several paces from Wang Bei and asked. His posture was ramrod straight, and his expression was cold and aloof. He seemed rather similar to Su Hanshan. Wang Bei was Wang Chong's second brother, and it was because of this relationship that Wang Bei had an extremely high prestige among the villagers of Wushang. Cui Piaoqi's training in Qixi was mostly handled by Wang Bei. Wang Bei rarely interfered with the training of Wushang village, so if he did come, there was definitely a reason. Cui Piaoqi, there's not much time left. A letter from Talas says that in a month at most, you must enter the battlefield. Wang Bei sternly said. Wushang village was isolated from the rest of the world, and the majority of its villagers were simple and unsophisticated, so they did not have much understanding of military matters. But this Cui Piaoqi was different. In Wushang village, he was an extremely rare talent for commanding generals. There were many things in the art of war that Cui Piaoqi might not understand in advance, but as long as it was explained to him, he would immediately understand and even comprehend by analogy. Therefore, in the later stages, Cui Piaoqi could complete the usual basic training work by himself. Understood? General Wang, be at ease. It won't take a month. It will only take 20-some days at most. Cui Piaoqi sternly said, his resolute face unperturbed. With these words, he quickly turned around and rejoined the ranks to begin training. Cutting formation. Hurry! With this order, the 6,000 Wushang cavalry shot off in every direction like quicksilver. Flap flap. Several days later, black eagles flew into the capital, disappearing into various parts of the capital. In the Four Quarters Embassy, behind a lush forest of bamboo, there was a round pond filled with lotus flowers. Fish swam beneath the lotus flowers. Next to the pond was an artificial mountain, and the atmosphere was tranquil and serene. At this moment, an old man dressed in a white robe was silently fishing on a folding bamboo chair. Unlike other fishermen, the old man's fishing rod only had a string, not a hook. Moreover, it was suspended in the air, not sinking into the water. But even so, there were many fish in the pool gathered below the string. Some of them even silently swam to a spot not far from the old man's feet, looking at the old man on the shore. It was as if this white-robed old man had some kind of special power that made the fish in the pool involuntarily approach him and get close to him. The old man's eyes were half closed, his expression tranquil. He sat there motionlessly, seemingly one with the garden, the pond, and the fish. Not far behind him, the Imperial Army soldiers lowered their heads, gazing at the old man's back with extreme respect in their eyes. Reporting. At this moment, a resounding voice came from behind them, followed by the heavy footsteps of an Imperial Army soldier as he hurried through the bamboo forest toward the pond. Splash, the water exploded, and the shoal of fish in the pool seemed to be frightened, quickly scattering in all directions. The originally peaceful and tranquil atmosphere disappeared in an instant. What's going on? Didn't I tell you not to disturb Duke Jiao when he's fishing? Have you forgotten all about it? At the side, a commander of the Imperial Guards had already walked over quickly and stopped the Imperial Guard who was delivering the letter. "Milord, it's news from Talas." The Imperial Army soldier who delivered the letter said solemnly. He naturally understood the rules of the Four Quarters Embassy, but this was no small matter. Moreover, the letter had been stamped with that large seal. "Even so, can't you wait a little longer?" the Imperial Army soldier angrily said. "Is it news from Chonga?" Right at this moment, an aged and mellow voice suddenly sounded out from behind them. When they heard these words, their bodies shook and they lowered their heads in unison. Reporting to Duke Jiao, it is not the young Marquis, but Anshi Protector General, Lord Gao Xianji. The messenger respectfully replied with his head lowered. By the pond, the white-robed elder was taken aback, and then he finally turned his head. "Bring that letter to me." While Duke Jiao was receiving Gao Xianji's letter in the nearby Taihe Palace, this letter from the distant Talas was like a heavy bomb, causing massive waves in the Tang dynasty. Absolutely not. The Tang dynasty has won at Talas, so why are they still conscripting soldiers? Talas isn't the territory of the Tang dynasty. Since they've won, they should be withdrawing back to Anshi. Why are Gao Xianji and the young Marquis still at Talas? What do they mean by the Tang dynasty is in imminent danger and a three-way alliance? If the Arabs really are as formidable as they say, how could they possibly have been defeated? It seems to me that they just want to gather soldiers to strengthen themselves. Your Majesty, this subject wishes to impeach Gao Xianji and Qixi Protector General Wang Chong. The two of them are seeking to reward themselves for their achievements and want to lie about the military situation so that they can threaten the imperial court. The court was in an uproar as Wang Chong's and Gao Xianji's memorials were brought into the court, immediately stirring up a massive debate. Desecration of military might. This is desecration of military might. The imperial court has already allocated 10 million taels of gold to a trifling outpost, and so many people have died. What more do they want? The civil officials were particularly vocal in their opposition. My great Tang has stood tall for 200 years and has weathered all kinds of storms. Will it really fall in the hands of a small country in the West? A civil official stepped forward, vehemently objecting to Wang Chong's decision. Absurd! Wang Chong is the son of heaven's disciple. Would he lie about an important matter of state and military might? Desecration of military might? From Anxi to Longxi, do you think he will only stop when all living beings are slaughtered? Have all of you forgotten what happened in the southwest? If not for the young marquis, the situation would have been unimaginable. Your Majesty, this subject wishes to impeach Assistant Minister of Rights, Zhang Mushing. How can the affairs of the state and the people be delayed by a scholar? The opposition of the civil officials also ignited the fury of the generals of the court, and they began to fiercely protest. Since ancient times, civil officials had been known as officials of the pen and the sword. In the imperial court, whenever there was a conflict between civil and military officials, the generals would usually concede and not argue with the civil officials. But this time, it was different. Almost all of the military generals stood up and set out, opposing the civil officials. The more one understood about the Battle of Talas in the northwest, the more one understood just how powerful the enemy was. Even someone like Gao Xianji had almost died there, much less others. The disparity in strength between the two sides was enormous, and Wang Chong had been able to use tens of thousands of soldiers to fight against an opponent several times his own. This result had not come easily. At a time like this, for Wang Chong and Gao Xianji to work together to report to the imperial court and request reinforcements meant that the situation was extremely dire. Tens of thousands of soldiers, 2 imperial great generals, and even the people of the empire were at stake. This was not the time to concede. Throughout the dynasties, the struggle between civil and military officials had never ceased, but it had generally been restrained. But this time, with the aid of Wang Chong and Go Xianji's memorial, the civil officials that the Great Tang had been accumulating for so long had completely erupted. Beneath the cinnabar coiling dragon pillar, King Qi sneered at this sight. Chapter 1033. The court debate continued from morning until evening, the debate reaching an unprecedented level of intensity. At dusk, a golden carriage draped with dragons emerged from a corner of the imperial palace. On the carriage, the King of Song was deeply concerned. Your Highness, did the matter at Talas not go smoothly? The old butler asked in concern, his hands tucked into his sleeves. In the past, the King of Song had also had times when things did not go smoothly in the court, but he was rarely as worried as he was now. The King of Song nodded, not hiding anything from the old butler. Your Highness, be at ease. Nothing will happen to Talas. King Qi also opposed it in the past, but didn't it still pass? The old butler consoled. Ha! The King of Song couldn't help but give a long sigh. If it was just King Qi stirring up trouble and inciting the ministers to oppose in court, things would be much simpler. But this time is different. The one opposing is not King Qi. He is only assisting from the side. The ones truly opposing are the civil officials of the Tang dynasty. Buzz. The old butler was stunned by these words, and he instantly fell silent. Even though the old butler rarely paid attention to matters of the court, he knew that this was a political struggle that was even more ferocious than a factional struggle. If the one opposing was not King Qi, but the civil officials of the court, then the nature of the matter would be completely different. He heard the King of Song's solemn voice. The Tang dynasty has enjoyed decades of peace. The people are getting more and more used to these peaceful days, and they are getting more and more disgusted with war. I am only worried that this is only the beginning. The debate in the court grew more and more intense, and as it grew, the name of Arabia became more and more familiar in the streets and alleys of the Tang dynasty. The names of Arabia, Uzan, the Western Turks, and Talas appeared more and more frequently in the restaurants and tea houses. While the entire capital was still discussing the alliance between Arabia and the other 2 countries, A falcon with golden claws flapped its wings and flew like a bolt of lightning to the northeast of the Tang dynasty. Several days later, in the Annong Protectorate headquarters in Yuzhou, Zhang Shogui was seated cross-legged on the ground. He extended a hand and took the letter from the capital. It was quiet in the tent. All the civil and military officials in the surroundings had their eyes focused on the man who was like a god in the northeast of the Tang dynasty. What a bunch of cynical scholars. Without soldiers on the campaign, how could the Tang dynasty be at peace? That brat at Talas has miscalculated. If he had lost this battle, the imperial court might have immediately mobilized soldiers, but he just happened to win. Now, it's easier said than done. Milord, the matter of Talas is currently causing a ruckus in the capital. In their letters, Wang Chong and Gao Xinji say that the Arabs have 400,000 soldiers and are about to reach Talas. Moreover, if they win, an endless stream of soldiers will follow. Does Arabia really have that many soldiers? How true is this matter? At this moment, Deputy General Zhao Can of the Annong Protectorate Army spoke from behind him, an extremely respectful expression on his face. Of course it's true. To his surprise, Zhang Shogui didn't even need to think before confirming. When I was stationed in Longxi, I heard that the Arabs have fierce personalities and love war. They've already conquered many countries to the west of the Tsong Mountains. At the time, I also sent people to gather some intelligence and learned that the rumors were true. Thus, I concluded that one mountain cannot hold two tigers, and that in the future, Arabia and the Tang dynasty will inevitably fight. The imperial court believes that Gao Xianji and that brat are exaggerating, but I know that they don't have the courage. The crime of deceiving the sovereign is no small matter. The Yuzhou generals in the tent were all dumbfounded. The current Talas was so far away that the imperial court was shrouded in fog as to what was going on there. No one had expected that, even though it was so far to the northeast, their protector general would know it like the back of his hand. But they quickly realized what was going on. Given Gao Xianji and Wang Chong's current state, they definitely don't have more than 60,000 soldiers. If it really is as they say and the 400,000 Arab soldiers arrive, won't they be doomed without reinforcements from the imperial court? Who can be blamed for this? Gao Xianji is just a junior, and his experience and martial arts can't compare to our milords. But after just a few victories, he dares to call himself a war god, thinking that he can stand on equal footing with Milord. He doesn't even think about how he can compare to Milord's achievements. And that brat, just because he's from a clan of ministers and generals, he dares to talk back to the protector general in the capital. Truly arrogant to the extreme. Now that Talas is in danger, I'd like to see just how they'll be able to fight against Milord in the future. This is called asking for it. The generals in the tent were all sneering as if they were waiting for a good show. Neither Gao Xinji nor Wang Chong were good people to the Annong Protectorate Army. Gao Xinji had never had much respect for Zhang Shogui, and Wang Chong had even killed Ashina Sugin in the capital, causing the Protector General to lose face. Thus, no one had a good opinion of these two. Zhang Shogui sat in the tent, one hand on the table as he silently smiled. Reporting. At this moment, a voice rang out. Before he could finish speaking, a messenger from the Annong Protectorate rushed into the tent with a letter in his hands and got down on one knee. Lord Protector General, the city of Talas has sent a letter. Milord, please look over it. Buzz. As soon as he finished speaking, the entire tent was deathly silent to the point that a pin drop could be heard. Everyone turned to the messenger, and even Zhang Shogui couldn't help but raise an eyebrow and turn his head. Talas was a land beyond the borders of the Tang dynasty. Several months ago, no one would have known of its existence, but now, even the people in the distant Yuzhou knew of it. Milord, what's going on? Why would Talas write to us at a time like this? To Zhang Shogui's right, a fierce-looking who dressed in a white robe suddenly creased his brow. Unlike the others in the tent, he had a pair of snow-white eyebrows, and there was almost no one in Yuzhou who did not recognize him. Baizhen Tuoyuo. This was a famous general under Zhang Shogui's command, a fierce Hu general that Zhang Shogui had recruited from Yuzhou, a brigadier general. He was extremely capable of leading troops. The other generals also silently looked at Zhang Shogui. Won't you know what they're plotting once you open the letter? Zhang Shogui grinned. As he spoke, he waved his hand at the messenger below. Zhang Shogui quickly took the letter from the messenger and skimmed through it, his expression turning strange. Haha, interesting. Zhang Shogui's sudden roar of laughter gave everyone in the tent a fright. "Milord, what's wrong?" Baijin Tuoyuo said. "Ha, truly interesting. That brat from the Wang clan at Talas actually sent me a letter asking for reinforcements. He wants me to send an army to help him." Zhang Shogui heartily laughed. "What? Help them? How could that be? Have they lost their minds? To think that they could think of asking our Anong Protectorate army to help them. Only if the sun rises from the west." Everyone in the tent was dumbfounded by this news. They had only just mentioned Wang Chong and the people of Talas when they received a letter asking for reinforcements. This was far too ironic. Zhang Shogui had a strange expression on his face, only faintly smiling as he passed the letter to Baijin Tuoyuo and the other generals in the tent. "Zhao Ken, Baijin Tuoyuo, pass it around. Tell me, what do you think about this matter?" Baijin Tuoyuo was stunned, and he subconsciously received the letter before circulating it with everyone in the tent. "Milord, I think that there's no need to pay attention to this letter. The imperial court will handle the matter of Talas. It's not our place to speak. Moreover, Yuzhou is very far from Talas. Even if Gao Xianji and that brat want reinforcements, it shouldn't be us, not to mention that Milord has a grudge against them." Baijin Tuoyuo immediately said as he looked at the letter. Talas was currently in grave danger. No matter what, the Anong Protectorate army should not be the one Wang Chong was requesting for reinforcements. "Zhao Ken, what do you think?" Zhang Shogui faintly smiled as he turned to Deputy General Zhao Kansas. "Milord, this general shares Baijin Tuoyuo's opinion. This subordinate believes that there's no need to worry about this letter. We can just pretend that we never received it." Zhao Ken said. Everyone in the tent nodded, clearly of the same opinion as Zhao Kan and Baijin Tuoyuo. Zhang Shogui and Wang Chong had always had a grudge, and Wang Chong's grandfather, Wang Jiuling, had even tried to impeach Zhang Shogui. If not for him, Zhang Shogui might have already become prime minister. "Ha!" Zhang Shogui lightly rapped his right hand on the table and then said something that left everyone dumbfounded. "Zhao Ken, Baijin Tuoyuo, you've been with me for many years, and you've been brigadier generals for a very long time, but even now, you're still at that level. And that brat from the Wang clan has already become Qixi Protector General in less than a year. Do you know how you differ from him?" "Milord." Everyone in the tent was dumbfounded. Zhao Kan and Baijin Tuoyuo were also dumbfounded. They had originally believed that the Protector General had a grudge with the Wang clan, so no matter how they looked at it, he wouldn't help them. But that was clearly not the case at all. "I have a personal grudge with that brat from the Wang clan and Wang Jiuling. If we were to meet in private, it wouldn't be excessive for me to kill them, but that brat from the Wang clan is asking for my help on official matters, for the sake of the empire. If I were to put aside official matters for my personal reasons and refuse him, wouldn't that prove that I, Zhang Shogui, am narrow-minded, that I can't even compare to a grandson of Wang Jiuling's? It would also prove that Wang Jiuling's words were correct. Moreover, it's fine if nothing happens to Talas, but if something does, do you think that the imperial court and the Holy Emperor will know that we refused Wang Chong's request for reinforcements?" Zhang Shogui said. His words silenced everyone in the tent, all of them dumbstruck. They had only thought about the grudge between the Anong Protectorate army and the Wang clan, but they had never thought about this. After following Zhang Shogui for so many years, they had a vague understanding of the Holy Emperor's way of doing things. If this matter were to leak out in the future, it would be no small matter. "But Milord, that brat has contradicted Milord many times. Are we really going to be threatened by him into sending troops?" Chapter 1034. The Holy Emperor's matter was truly no small matter, but the two of them found it rather difficult to accept that they would send soldiers to help this brat just because of a letter. "Ha, blackmail? You're overestimating that brat too much." Zhang Shogui grinned. "Soldiers naturally have to be sent, but it's not necessarily because of that brat. Zhao Ken, Baizhen Tuoyuo, remember this. Great generals do not compete in martial arts and strength, but also in the bearing of a general. Could our Anong Protectorate army lose to a brat who still smells of his mother's milk? Didn't that brat send a letter asking for 4,000 soldiers to help him? Zhao Ken, Baizhen Tuoyuo, pick 6,000 elites for me. In addition, report to the imperial court that although I, Zhang Shogui, am in Yuzhou, I am concerned about the imperial court and am willing to send 6,000 soldiers to reinforce Talas. Zhang Shogui narrowed his eyes and rapped his right hand on the table with these last words, his voice tinged with deeper meaning. Zhao Can and Baizhen Tuoyuo froze, confused at the start, but as they had followed Zhang Shogui for many years, they quickly understood. If Zhang Shogui directly sent 6,000 soldiers to Wangchong, that would be a private matter between the two of them, but if Zhang Shogui wrote a letter to the imperial court while sending these soldiers, that would be a matter between Zhang Shogui and the imperial court. The Anong Protectorate army was expressing its loyalty to the imperial court and the Holy Emperor. Although this matter had arisen from a letter from Wangchong, it no longer had much to do with Wangchong. Not only that, the two of them had also thought of something even deeper. Talas was currently in grave danger. If the Anong Protectorate army could be the first to respond and send reinforcements, then whether the Battle of Talas ended in victory or defeat, the Anong Protectorate army would be invincible. At the same time, it would prove its loyalty to the imperial court. In this way, they could turn passivity into initiative. In addition, His Excellency had always wanted to become Prime Minister of the Tang Dynasty, and the greatest obstacle to this was the virtuous Prime Minister of the Tang Dynasty, Duke Jiao. If they could lend a hand to Talas now, they might be able to reduce some of this resistance for His Excellency in the future. This general understands. Your subordinate will do so. Of the 6 protector generals of the Tang Dynasty, Zhang Shogui was far from the only one who had received a letter from Talas. All the generals of the Biding Protectorate were gathered in the hall. Biding Protector General and Sishun, a valiant figure, was seated at the head of the hall. Have you seen Gao Xianji's letter? And Sichuan's eyes were slightly closed. His thunder-like gaze swept over all the generals under His Highness. Lord Protector General, forgive me for speaking frankly. Of all the borders, our Biding Protectorate has the most soldiers, but we guard the longest border and face the most enemies. Besides the Western Turkic Khaganate, they also had to guard against the Eastern Turkic Khaganate. The combined soldiers of these two countries numbered nearly 1 million. Moreover, if Gao Xianji wanted ordinary soldiers, it would have been one thing, but it just so happens that he wants our elite Dragon Stallion army. Our Biding Protectorate has hundreds of thousands of soldiers, but the Dragon Stallion army only has a few thousand. Therefore, this general believes that this matter absolutely cannot be agreed to. Lord Protector General, this general believes that this cannot be done. Although the Dragon Stallion army is precious, the situation at Talas is extremely serious. This time, the Arabian Empire to the west of the Tsong Mountains is a menacing force. If Gao Xianji's forces cannot stop the Arabs, then our Biding Protectorate army will bear the brunt of the attack. When that time comes, the Dragon Stallion army will no longer be able to resolve the problem. Helping the Anxi Protectorate army is actually helping ourselves. Without the lips, the teeth will feel the cold. That's right. Besides the Arabs, there is also the celestial wolf Great General Duwisili of the Western Turks, a formidable foe of our Biding Protectorate. By sending the Dragon Stallion army to deal with Duwisili, we are actually helping ourselves. Absurd. Did you see Gao Xianji's memorials? The Arabs will send an army of 400,000. Gao Xianji's forces alone won't be able to stop them. In the end, Talas will fall. To send the Dragon Stallion army at a time like this is just suicide. Voices of opposition and support rose and fell in the hall, the debate extremely intense. And Sishun sat motionlessly with his eyes closed, silently listening to the arguments. No one could tell what he was thinking. But at this moment, reporting. Tap, tap, tap. Hurried footsteps could be heard from outside as a messenger from the Biding Protectorate rushed into the hall, a letter in his hand. A letter from Talas. "Milord, please take a look." Buzz. The entire hall instantly fell deathly silent upon hearing these words. Gao Xinji had just sent a letter, so why was there another one now? "Bring the letter over." A dignified voice resounded through the hall, and Sishun opened his eyes, exuding an intimidating light. And Sishun took the letter from the messenger and tore it open. He glanced at it, and then his body trembled. A look of astonishment flashed in his eyes, and he sat up straight. Interesting. Wang Chong, you've truly made a deal that I can't refuse. Longxi, Big Dipper City. This strategic city of the western part of the Tang dynasty had been completely restored to its former glory. The entire city had been renovated and was still as grand and majestic as ever. Under the management of the Big Dipper army, the scars of battle had been completely erased from the city. But at this moment, Big Dipper City was heavily guarded. Other than the patrolling soldiers, there were no Big Dipper army officers on the walls. You've all read the young Marquis's letter. What do you think? In the main hall of Big Dipper City, Geshu Han sat at the highest seat. Beneath him was a bustling crowd, all of them the corps commanders of the Big Dipper army. They were arranged in neat rows and rows, but they were all thinking about something. The atmosphere was solemn. "Great General, the battle at Talas is in a critical state. The safety of all of Anxi and Qixi is tied to that battle. This subordinate is worried that if the Anxi Protectorate and Qixi Protectorate cannot hold, it will be our Big Dipper army's turn. Milord, this subordinate recommends that our Big Dipper army immediately march north to Talas and join forces with Anxi and Qixi to deal with the Arabs." "Impossible. If we move away, what will happen to the people of Longxi? Don't forget, this is a land of 1,000 li. If the Uzun use this chance to invade the east and start a massacre, we will lose, and we will be humiliated. Moreover, the Anxi Protectorate army is well equipped, and after a long period of conquest, they are no weaker than us. If the Anxi Protectorate army can't deal with them, do you think our Big Dipper army can? Moreover, we're talking about 400,000 soldiers." In the hall, the Big Dipper army officers were all expressing their opinions, but unlike the others, the Big Dipper army was considering whether they should march north to Talas and join forces with Anxi and Qixi to resist the Arab cavalry. The Big Dipper army of Longxi had experienced several generations of commanders, and it had seen and experienced far more than the average person. Moreover, the Big Dipper army was the closest to Talas, Qixi, and Anxi, so it had received the most information and felt the greatest threat. Thus, it considered problems differently from the other protectorates. As Geshu Han listened to the discussions of his officers, his brow furrowed even tighter. Suddenly, Geshu Han's gaze swept past one of the generals who had his head lowered in thought. He suddenly had a thought and asked, "Silly, what do you think?" Starving Wolf War General Wang Sili was one of Geshu Han's 7 great generals, a brigadier general. His father, Wang Qianwei, had been a famed general of the north, a true descendant of a clan of generals. Wang Sili had served the Tang dynasty's war god Wang Zhongxi and Geshu Han, 2 great generals. He was extremely experienced and astute, so both Wang Zhongxi and Geshu Han regarded him as their left and right arms. "Milord, the 2 Uzun generals, Hushu Wuzong and Dusong Mangpoj, have all gone north, and 2 of the Uzun soldiers have been killed by the young Marquis's assault. In addition, our Big Dipper army has been fighting for many years, and Uzun is only outwardly strong but inwardly weak. In truth, we don't have many soldiers that we can actually use. The only ones we have to fear are the soldiers of the Yarlung royal lineage, the soldiers guarding the royal capital, and the White Lion Great General Witadra Konglo." Wang Sili lowered his head, his eyes glimmering with a deep and wise light. "But the general's concerns are not without reason. Longxi is an important place that we are guarding. If we move our soldiers on our own, we will be disobeying the orders of the imperial court. If something really does go wrong, we will not be able to bear the consequences. But this general believes that Talas must be reinforced. While Longxi's safety is guaranteed, we can send as many soldiers as we can to the north. This subordinate believes that before we send our soldiers, we can initiate a battle, turning passivity into initiative and weakening Uzun's strength. Once the situation in Longxi is stabilized, we can send reinforcements to Talas. In addition, the young Marquis said in his letter that we only need to send 2,000 of our elite soldiers of the Divine Martial Army. This general believes that we can increase this number to 3,000, and then send another 3,000 elites to assist the Anxi Protectorate Army and Qixi Protectorate. After all, they are actually fighting for our sake. But our Big Dipper army only has 20 to 30,000 soldiers. If we send 7,000, how can we stop Uzin's counterattack? Wang Sili had barely finished speaking when one of the generals harshly objected. Ever since Wang Zhongxi's time, the Big Dipper army had always pursued a policy of elite soldiers. Thus, in the Longxi region, the Big Dipper army had always used the fewest soldiers to fight against the most enemies. They were already short on soldiers, so how could they have the strength to reinforce the other armies? This was also why the Big Dipper army was still debating. This matter isn't that difficult. Wang Sili laughed when he heard this. The 7,000 soldiers we can send north can be replenished by the prefectural armies in Longxi. With Milord overseeing the army and the cooperation of the generals, there won't be any mishaps. Moreover, the prefectural armies of Longxi have always been our reserves. Since the establishment of the Big Dipper army, we should give them a chance and replenish them with new blood. Unlike the others, Wang Sili appeared rather relaxed. The generals in the hall glanced at each other. They had originally been prepared to retort, but after some thought, they realized that Wang Sili's words were not without reason. Moreover, this truly was a feasible plan, and the hall fell silent. Geshu Han sat on the highest seat, his eyes like lightning as he slowly swept them over the crowd. A few moments later, he had an idea. "Silly, let's do as you say." Chapter 1035. The generals on the border were far from the only ones to receive the news of the upheaval at Talas. While everyone was focused on the developments in the imperial court, few people noticed that several carrier pigeons were flying into the capital amidst the eagles of the military. Unlike the other letters, these were all letters from Wang Chang's family. In the northwest of the imperial city, in the Imperial Army's Educational Institute, a middle-aged man was seated cross-legged in a room. The extravagant armor on his body clearly showed that he was a commandant of the Imperial Army. The room was quiet, but the middle-aged man exuded a powerful aura that was constantly growing like bamboo after the rain. White steam was rising from the man's head, and his forehead was beaded with cold sweat. It was obvious that he had reached an extremely critical juncture in his martial cultivation. Heart as calm as an abyss, heart as deep as a lake. A mantra flashed through the middle-aged man's mind, and he instantly calmed down. Bzz. After some time, the white steam above the man's head began to lessen and the cold sweat on his forehead began to dissipate. Finally, I've finally broken through to Tier 7 of the Imperial Martial Realm. Li Lin opened his eyes and gave a long sigh, his expression like he had been relieved of a great burden. Ever since Wang Chong had given him that technique, Li Lin had been diligently cultivating it. For some reason, the technique Wang Chong had given him seemed to be extremely compatible with him, as if it had been tailor-made for him. Through the use of this technique and a few external opportunities, Li Lin's martial arts had advanced by leaps and bounds, allowing him to reach his current level. Taking a violet embroidered box from a nearby bed, Li Lin gently opened it and took out a white pill the size of a pigeon egg. He stuffed it into his mouth and swallowed it. Boom! The pill melted, and a majestic medicinal energy erupted from Li Lin's abdomen like a volcano, rushing into his meridians. Under the effect of the pill, Li Lin's energy swelled, and he firmly stabilized his cultivation at Tier 7 of the Imperial Martial Realm. Chong, thank you. If not for you, uncle-in-law would have never been able to make a name for himself in the Imperial Army. After a long time, Li Lin digested the medicinal energy of the pill. He raised his head with a gratified look in his eyes. After 3 generations, the Wang clan had finally produced another Qilin son, and he had been made the young Marquis, the son of Heaven's disciple. There was no one in the capital who did not know of him, and Li Lin, his uncle, had benefited greatly from this. Li Lin's talent wasn't too outstanding. If it was just his cultivation technique alone, It would have been very difficult for him to grow so quickly in such a short period of time. However, with the large number of pills left behind by Wang Chong, Li Lin's strength skyrocketed, completely stabilizing his position in the imperial army. The current Li Lin was completely different from how he had been when he was just a lowly commandant at the city gate. He now commanded a considerable number of imperial soldiers and horses. In the beginning, Li Lin had only relied on the Wang family's prestige, but now he had won everyone's respect with his own great strength. Voila! Just as he was deep in thought, the sound of fluttering wings suddenly came from outside the window. Li Lin turned his head and looked in the direction of the sound, only to see a white messenger pigeon fluttering outside the window. But because Li Lin was cultivating, he had closed the doors and windows tightly, so he could not enter. A hint of doubt flashed across Li Lin's eyes, but he soon recovered. With a smile, he opened the window and welcomed the white messenger pigeon in. He skillfully took the letter from the pigeon's leg and opened it. With just a single glance, Li Lin was immediately stunned. The white letter was completely blank, and there were only 3 words written at the very center: Xuanwu Army. The entire letter did not state the purpose, nor did it state the sender. But when Li Lin looked at the letter, a deep frown gradually formed on his forehead. So fast! Li Lin muttered as he looked at the 3 words. This was a secret code that they had agreed upon many years ago. Other than him and Wang Chong, no one else knew the meaning of these 3 words. Holding onto the letter, Li Lin pushed open the door and walked out. Zhao Fengchen, the quasi-marshal of the imperial army. If Wang Chong wanted to accomplish what Wang Chong had said in the letter, Wang Chong would have to obtain his help. At this moment, Zhao Fengchen was the strongest ally of the Wang clan in the imperial army. A gust of wind blew, and in just a moment, Li Lin disappeared from the massive royal capital. Several hundred li outside the capital, a massive mountain had been thrust into the earth like a heaven-shaking sword. The Imperial Heaven Pillar Mountain. This was one of the 4 sacred training mountains of the Tang dynasty. It was rumored that several hundred years ago, the young Emperor Taizong had once offered sacrifices to the heavens and earth and inspected his troops. Thus, the Imperial Heaven Pillar Mountain had become the main training camp of the Imperial Army. Hey! Shouts of training resounded throughout the mountain range. On the lush surface of the mountain, a group of reserve Imperial Army soldiers dressed in black uniforms ran along a rugged mountain path toward the summit. Even higher up the mountain, hundreds of Imperial Army members were training at the peak of the mountain, shrouded in mist. At the highest point of the summit, a thin middle-aged man was seated cross-legged on a round rock, silently looking down at the scenery below. A gust of wind swept up the man's hair. In an instant, the man looked down the mountain, and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He looked calm and relaxed. Just at that moment, a messenger pigeon flapped its wings and flew across the sky. Suddenly, it descended from the clouds toward the man's location like a bolt of lightning. The thin man's eyebrows twitched, and a trace of astonishment flashed through his eyes. He suddenly stood up from the rock and caught the pigeon that flew down from the sky. With just a glance, the man's smile faded, and his expression turned extremely serious. Chong, as expected, you still spoke. The war at Talas is already so grim that you need to use that force so soon? A complicated look flashed through Wang Mi's eyes, and he immediately began to walk toward the belly of the mountain. No matter how fierce the civil and military struggle at Talas was in the imperial court, it was an extremely distant matter to the ordinary people of the Central Plains. The capital remained calm and peaceful. In the western part of the city, in the Ghost Tree district, there was a bustling crowd. No one noticed that a child about 8 or 9 years old was carrying a half-foot-tall wine gourd in his hand, humming and swinging it as he strolled around. Boss, how much for a skewer of tonghalu? 2 copper coins. I'll take it. Boss, give me 2 taels of wine. Boss, I'd like a plate of braised beef. The child bought as he walked, and it didn't take long for the gourd to be filled with wine, a few more dishes in his basket, and a skewer of tonghalu in his hand. The peddlers along the way all greeted the child. After spending so much time here, everyone was very familiar with this child. Every day, he would come here to buy a pot of wine and a few dishes. Bang! As the child was licking the tonghulu, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him. Caught off guard, the child ran headfirst into this figure. Sorry. The child panicked and hurriedly apologized. But when he raised his head and saw the figure in front of him, the child was instantly dumbfounded. The person before him was tall and burly, wearing armor. He was not one of the common merchants or commoners of the Ghost Tree District, but a soldier of high status. Jingle! Just as the child was panicking, a golden red bell suddenly hung down. The black image of a ghost tree was extremely conspicuous on the golden red bell. Senior! Seeing the bell and the image, the child was stunned, and then a look of pleasant surprise appeared on his face. You were sent by Senior? Marquis is in the northwest and can't come. He sent someone to deliver a letter to you. He said that you'll understand once you see this bell. The soldier nodded. As he spoke, he took out a letter from his pocket, held it with both hands, and handed it over respectfully. Send my regards to Senior Sue. In the end, the soldier in armor couldn't help but say it out loud. Who could have imagined that this child of 8 or 9 years old was actually the disciple of the Tang dynasty's god of war, So Yongsun? Whenever he thought of that godlike existence in the Tang dynasty, the soldier couldn't help but feel excited. Got it. The child made a face, took the letter from the soldier's hand, and skipped away quickly. One carrier pigeon after another flew into the capital of the Tang dynasty, and one eagle after another flew to the border of the capital. These carrier pigeons and eagles were like wooden poles plunged into the ground, and the entire central plains began to move according to the plans of Wang Chong and Gao Xianji. Meanwhile, in the distant Talas, the clouds of war were thick and the air was fraught with tension. The news from the Khorasani had caused the entire city of Talas to enter a state of readiness for war. In a dimly lit study in the northwest corner of Talas, Wang Chong's eyes flickered. Wang Chong was seated behind a desk, and before him was a pile of letters piled up like a mountain. Wang Chong, you were looking for me? Suddenly, the door opened and Gao Xianji, dressed in martial attire, walked in. Lord Protector General, you've come. Wang Chong raised his head and rubbed his eyes, a hint of exhaustion on his face. You haven't slept all night. Are you still thinking about the Arabs? Gao Xianji said. Wang Chong smiled and nodded. Abu Muslim had not retreated, and a new wave of soldiers was about to arrive. As the commander-in-chief of the army, how could he possibly sleep? Wang Chong didn't even need to think about it to know that Gao Xianji was probably in the same state as him. Abu Muslim, Qutayba, and Osman. If everything is really as that Khorasani said, then it won't be long before 3 Arab governors gather at Talas. If we add Ziyad, Uzun, and the Western Turks Dawusali, Hushu Wizong, and Dusong Mangpoj, then the eastern Tsong Mountains will have 7 enemy great generals. This is extremely disadvantageous to us. Wang Chong's words voiced his concern. Great generals would always be the supreme fighting force of a country, and they were also powerful existences that could alter the course of the battlefield. 400,000 elites and 7 great generals were a force that could crush the entire Tang dynasty army into powder. This was also why Wang Chong had found it hard to sleep these last few days. Is it possible that the information from Khorasan is inaccurate? Gao Xianji hesitated for a moment before asking. Impossible. Wang Chong bitterly smiled and shook his head. The Khorasani have a blood feud with the Arabs. They will definitely spare no effort to investigate the Arabs. Even if there's a discrepancy in the number of soldiers, it won't be by much. Even if they don't have 400,000 soldiers, they have at least 300,000. This is still not something we can fight. Chapter 1036. The Tang dynasty had just experienced a bitter battle. Even with Gao Xianji's Anxi Protectorate army, it only had around 60,000 soldiers, and many of them were wounded. This was truly a grievous loss. Moreover, the ballista army that served as a deterrent force had also suffered grievous losses. Of the 3,000 Tang dynasty ballistae, including the ballistae of the Anxi Protectorate army, only around 1,000 were left. In these circumstances, one could easily imagine how much fighting power they had lost. This small number of soldiers would never be able to defeat 7 great generals and 400,000 elites. Moreover, Talas was surrounded by a vast expanse of plains. Other than the hills, there was nothing else that could be used. For generals, this was precisely the most disadvantageous terrain. In this sort of place, one could only rely on tactics, formations, and the ability of the commanders on both sides to determine who was superior. The Central Plains is very far from Talas. Even cavalry will need at least a month to get there. Perhaps we don't have much time. Gao Xianji bitterly smiled. We truly don't have much time, but the Arabs probably won't be that fast either. Based on what the Khorasani say, with 3 Arab governors gathered, it won't be easy for the soldiers of the other 2 governors to get to Talas. Moreover, the soldiers of the 3 sides need to coordinate with each other and move together, which will take even longer. I estimate that even if they don't need a month, it won't be much longer. To his surprise, Wang Chong faintly smiled, seemingly unconcerned about what Gao Xianji was worried about. A month? Gao Xianji was finally stunned, not daring to believe his ears. The distance between Arabia and Talas was much closer than the distance between the Tang dynasty. What Gao Xianji was most worried about was that there wasn't enough time. If the Arab army gathered, 400,000 soldiers at the gates, not even the reinforcements of the Tang dynasty would be able to do anything. Absolutely. Wang Chong smiled, a confident look on his face. The Tang dynasty knew far too little about Arabia. Even a top-class imperial great general like Gao Xianji knew almost nothing about Arabia. As for Cairo and Tarsus, Gao Xianji, like all the other Tang generals, probably knew nothing about these 2 places other than the names of these 2 places. He had no idea where they were or how far away they were. But Wang Chong knew. The Abbasid Caliphate of this era possessed the largest territory in history. In terms of territory, it was more than 1 million square kilometers larger than the Tang dynasty. From this, one could easily imagine how large Arabia was. As for Tarsus, it was located at the northernmost tip of Arabia's territory, extremely far from Talas. It would definitely take a lot of time to gather the troops from such a faraway place. This was also why Wang Chong was confident that the Arabian Empire would need at least a month to reach the walls. For the Tang dynasty, they still had enough time to prepare for this battle. At least the gap between them wasn't as big as they had imagined. Lord Protector General, how are your injuries recovering? Wang Chong quickly regained his composure. 90% of my injuries have recovered, but I'm afraid that I'm still lacking the strength to deal with Abu Muslim. Gao Xianji couldn't help but give a deep sigh. Wang Chong also couldn't help but frown, his heart heavy. Gao Xianji's final words described the situation of the Tang dynasty and its army at Talas. The Arabian Empire had sent 3 governors for this operation, and the only one who could contend against them was Gao Xianji. If not even the strongest of them, Gao Xianji, could deal with them, the situation of the rest of the army could be easily imagined. But Wang Chong quickly glanced over the thin sheets of paper on the table and came to his senses. Whether or not his plan would be effective depended on these papers. "Milord, I once obtained a supreme martial art in the capital, but because its nature was incompatible, I never cultivated it. After fighting alongside Milord, I sensed that the nature of Milord's stellar energy is somewhat similar to this supreme martial art. Perhaps it can be of some help to Milord Protector General." Wang Chong's eyes focused, and he suddenly extended a finger and flicked the 2 sheets of paper toward Gao Xianji. "Is that so?" Gao Xianji faintly smiled, instinctively wanting to refuse. He was the Anshi war god, a supreme imperial great general. In the entire world, he could count on one hand the number of people who could instruct him on anything useful. Moreover, Wang Chong's cultivation was even lower than his own, so how could he possibly offer anything useful? But when he saw the earnest and expectant look on Wang Chong's face, Gao Xianji began to hesitate. Talas was currently fraught with danger, and any bit of strength would be of immense help. Besides, Wang Chong was doing this out of goodwill. "Okay, I'll take these papers back and take a look." As Gao Xianji spoke, he took the 2 sheets of paper and put them into his bosom. Wang Chong breathed a small sigh of relief at this sight. He had spent a few days picking out this incantation from the countless cultivation methods and chants in his memory. And from a certain perspective, this technique was closely related to Gao Xinji, and it would probably be of the greatest help to Gao Xinji. But not even Wang Chong had much confidence in the specifics until the effects were seen. After all, this was something that should never have happened in history. It's enough. As long as he goes back and takes a look, he'll naturally understand. Wang Chong quietly said to himself. He could sense that Gao Xinji wasn't very interested in the technique he had given him. However, Wang Chong did not press him. Some things could not be rushed. That's right, there's one more thing. Wang Chong quickly regained his composure. In your last battle with Abu Muslim, Lord Protector General's armor was shattered, so this time, I ordered someone to use meteoric metal to forge a set of armor for Lord Protector General. Oh! Gao Xinji's body trembled slightly, and a bright light shone in his eyes. He was immediately interested. Meteoric metal had always been an extremely rare material in this world. Not even the armor that the Holy Emperor had given him contained that much meteoric metal. But Wang Chong's existence had completely defied common sense. Gao Xinji didn't know how he had done it, but he had never seen so much meteoric metal in his life. In Wang Chong's hands, this extremely rare meteoric metal seemed like ordinary steel. This was simply astonishing. Wang Chong faintly smiled and did not keep Gao Xinji in suspense. He extended a finger and lightly knocked on a wooden chest leaning against the desk. Bang! The wooden board exploded, revealing a set of black and red armor. Even someone of Gao Xinji's experience couldn't help but widen his eyes at the sight of this armor, and his vision brightened. This armor was extremely beautiful, each scale having been polished thousands of times. It was as smooth as a mirror, and even in the dim light of the room, it shone with a dazzling light. As for the armor as a whole, it was mighty yet elegant. Every line had been meticulously designed, independent yet perfectly unified. Moreover, looking from afar, it was like a dragon or a tiger, filled with a strong sense of power and ferocious explosive power. Impossible! Even someone of Gao Xinji's experience couldn't help but sigh in shock at the sight of this armor. The armor Wang Chong had forged was different from any armor he had ever seen. The style and level of craftsmanship far surpassed any other armor he had ever seen. Gao Xinji only needed one glance to fall in love with it. How is it? Wang Chong faintly smiled. Unbelievable! Wang Chong, how did you do it? Gao Xinji said sincerely. There seemed to be nothing that Wang Chong couldn't do. Heh, Lord Protector General, have you forgotten that I am a Grandmaster Weaponsmith? Wang Chong said. I almost forgot. No one can compare to you in weaponsmithing. Since you can forge Wuzi steel swords, you can naturally forge armor. Gao Xinji was taken aback for a moment, and then he laughed. In this world, anyone who claimed to be a Grandmaster Weaponsmith would feel like they were boasting. Only Wang Chong would not give off the impression that he was boasting. On the contrary, people would think that he was being too modest. Whether it was the peerlessly sharp Wuzi steel swords that could cut through metal like mud, the vast and impregnable fortress of steel, or the unstoppable giant ballistae that could even kill behemoths, Wang Chong's performance had far surpassed that of a Grandmaster Weaponsmith. With his abilities, forging a suit of armor was naturally no problem. Wang Chong silently smiled. He had personally designed this armor, and Zhang Shouji had supervised and participated in its creation. He had used many of the principles of physics that Wang Chong knew and the knowledge of that other world. While it was gorgeous, it also increased its defensive strength. In particular, Wang Chong had strengthened the armor so that it would be of the greatest help to Gao Xinji, reducing the number of injuries and threats he would suffer in a battle with a top-class expert like Abu Muslim. Gao Xinji was overjoyed, and with Wang Chong's permission, he immediately took the armor and tried it on. Not bad. It's a perfect fit. The more Gao Xinji looked at it, the more delighted he became. Wang Chong's armor was extremely meticulous. Every piece, every curve, every joint made Gao Xinji feel like it was a part of his body. Gao Xinji even felt like the armor was breathing with him, a feeling that Gao Xinji had never experienced before. As long as Lord Protector General likes it. Wang Chong faintly smiled. After giving away the armor, the two began to discuss the defense and the possible attacks they might face in the future. That's right, Lord Protector General, there's another matter. After some time, just when the two were about to reach an agreement, Wang Chong suddenly brought up a matter that had been on his mind for a very long time. It was also the main reason he had called Gao Xianji over. I want to discuss a matter with Lord Protector General. Quality is more important than quantity. I want to select some of the most elite soldiers from the Anxi Protectorate Army, Qixi Protectorate, and mercenaries to form a special army to deal with the Arabs. Gao Xianji raised an eyebrow in surprise. The Tang dynasty simply didn't have enough soldiers at Talas. He had never imagined that Wang Chong would propose to form an army at a time like this. What sort of army do you want to form? Chapter 1037. Lord Gao, you also know that the majority of our soldiers are infantry. In truth, the strongest force of the Tang dynasty was also infantry, although they also had a considerable number of cavalry. But in terms of cavalry, other than the Wushang cavalry, there are very few cavalry that can compare to the Arab cavalry. Wang Chong sincerely said. He had thought about this plan for a very long time, but he still needed Gao Xianji's agreement to actually push it forward. This truly is the case. The Anxi Protectorate Army is already the elite of the Tang dynasty protectorates. But it doesn't have much of an advantage against the Arabs. If not for the city of Talas behind us, we would have never been able to last so long in the wilderness against so many Arabs. Gao Xianji sternly said. Whether it was the Arabs, the Western Turks, or the Uzan, they were all people who lived on horseback. In this aspect, the Tang dynasty, as a people of agriculture, could not compare to them. This was already public opinion, and there was no need to deny it. When fighting against other races, we actually rely more on infantry, cavalry, and ballista soldiers to fight together. In this aspect, we are different from the Arabs and the Western Turks. Both sides fight in different ways, so it's not easy to make a direct comparison. But on the plains and in the wilderness, cavalry still has the absolute advantage. Gao Xianji said. Wang Chong nodded. Gao Xianji's final words had revealed the true situation of the Tang dynasty. To the Tang dynasty, which was dominated by infantry, the open plains of Talas were the most unfavorable terrain. In this place, the mobility of the cavalry far surpassed that of the infantry. Furthermore, the boundless flat terrain also allowed the cavalry to better arrange their formations and charge at maximum speed. If not for the two steel defense lines Wang Chong had erected around Talas and the threat of the Tang dynasty ballistae, the Tang dynasty's infantry would have found it very difficult to defend against the charge of so many elite Arab cavalry. This is also what I've always wanted to change. If the situation really is as the Khorasani have said, then 400,000 elite soldiers and 3 Arab governors will be a challenge we've never encountered before. Moreover, Abu Muslim has fought with us for so long that he has experience. The 2 steel defense lines won't be able to stop him for long. Wang Chong said. He would never underestimate any opponent, much less one of the most outstanding great generals of the Arabian Empire. Even in the southwest, Daluan Ruozan had thought of using ropes and elephants to deal with the steel wall, let alone Arabia, which was even stronger and had even more resources to spare. If that's the case, we can only retreat to Talas, Gao Xianji said, frowning unknowingly. But if we retreat into the city, we will completely lose the initiative and fall into the opponent's rhythm. More importantly, when enemies meet on a narrow path, only the courageous will emerge victorious. This is the first large-scale conflict between Arabia and the Tang dynasty. We don't understand Arabia, and Arabia doesn't understand the Tang dynasty. As long as we retreat into the city, we will be showing weakness to the enemy. Given the Arabian Empire's ambitions, there will be endless wars in the future. Wang Chong finished the second half of what Gao Xianji had left out. This battle was not just a struggle for power, but also a struggle for momentum. This was why Wang Chong had insisted on the 2 steel defense lines outside the city, to defend against the enemy from the outside and not from the inside. It was also why Wang Chong and Gao Xianji had not retreated from Talas even though they had defeated the Arabs. Not only that, if the Arabs have learned their lesson from last time and surround Talas without attacking, we won't even need 3 months. In less than 3 months, when our rations are exhausted, we will lose without a doubt. The study was quiet. Gao Xianji's brow was tightly furrowed, and the atmosphere was oppressive. Abu Muslim was a valiant general, but he was not lacking in strategy. The first time, he had believed that he could force his way through, but after 2 whole months, he had made no progress. This time, if the Tang dynasty wanted to rely on the city of Talas, it would not be so simple. Even more dangerous was that once the 2 steel defense lines were lost, the Uzan, the Western Turks, and the Arabs would gather together. With 7 great general experts, the 3 empires would probably choose to use the strength of their great generals to crush the Tang dynasty. What do you plan to do? Gao Xianji broke the silence a few moments later. Wang Chong faintly smiled, knowing that Gao Xianji had already thought it through. I want to form a new type of soldier, the Mo Saber warriors. Mo Saber warriors? Gao Xianji raised his head and looked at Wang Chong, a hint of confusion in his eyes. Gao Xianji was experienced and well-read, but he had never heard of this sort of square formation. What is the meaning of this? Have you even changed your weapon? Gao Xianji had acutely extracted the words Mo Saber from Wang Chong's words. The Tang dynasty had all kinds of sabers, but he had never heard of the Mo Saber. Haha, I just knew that I couldn't hide it from milord. Wang Chong faintly smiled, no longer intending to keep him in suspense. Someone, bring the item in. Yes, Marquis. A voice came from outside, and under Gao Xianji's curious gaze, a soldier of the Qixi Protectorate army strode in, his head held high and his chest puffed out, a brocade box 7 or 8 feet long on his shoulder. Crescent Moon Saber? Gao Xianji turned to Wang Chong in surprise. The weapons of the Tang dynasty were 3 feet long, with a few being 4 feet long. Sabers were a little longer, but the difference wasn't that great. Sabers that could reach 4 feet were extremely rare, and the only one that Gao Xianji knew of was the Green Dragon Crescent Moon Saber. It was rumored that more than 500 years ago, at the end of the Eastern Han dynasty, the long-haired martial saint of the Central Plains with the surname Guan used the Green Dragon Crescent Moon Saber. But this weapon was only suitable for martial arts. Duels between great generals were also part of the scope of martial arts, so they could naturally use this weapon. But for ordinary soldiers, it was extremely inconvenient to use this weapon on such a large scale. Of course not. Under Gao Xianji's stunned gaze, Wang Chong chuckled and shook his head. He stood up from behind the table and walked up to the Qixi Protectorate soldier. "Milord, take a look and you'll understand." As he spoke, he gestured at the soldier. Clap. The brocade box opened, revealing a weapon 7 or 8 feet long that was completely different from any other weapon in this world, quietly lying at the bottom of the box for the first time. At the sight of the weapon at the bottom of the box, even Gao Xianji couldn't help but narrow his eyes, a hint of shock appearing on his face. The weapon in the box had a perfectly straight blade, and the blade was extremely sharp. Moreover, the design of the blade and the back of the blade were extremely smooth, making it extremely easy to hack and slash. With one look, one could tell that it was an abnormally powerful weapon. Moreover, the surface of the weapon was as smooth as a mirror, its design extremely ornate. It was like a shark of the sea, savage but elegant. This was no longer a weapon, but the most exquisite of works of art. Even something as cruel as slaughter had been raised to the realm of art. Even Gao Xianji had to admit that Wang Chong had truly reached a breathtaking level in weaponsmithing. In all the countries of the continent, not just the Tang dynasty, probably no one could compare to Wang Chong. But the light in Gao Xianji's eyes only lasted for a few moments before dimming. This truly is a good saber. But I'm afraid that it's not suitable for use on the battlefield. Gao Xianji quickly looked away from the Mo saber, and somewhat regretfully said, "Oh." Wang Chong faintly smiled, took a sip of tea from the table, and then looked at Gao Xianji, apparently having predicted his reaction. "Lord Protector General, do you feel that the blade, edge, and back of this saber are too long? Although it's easy to wield, it's easy to break?" Correct. Gao Xianji didn't deny it. He said with some regret, with a hint of regret, he said, "We've thought about this sort of saber before, and even before that, there were countless people who wanted to forge such a large saber or sword. But they've all failed. It's said that the hard is easy to break." Swords and sabers are designed to be 3 to 4 feet long so that they don't break. This saber is nearly 8 feet long, and in a real battle, it won't even last 10 slashes before breaking in two. And on the fierce battlefield, I presume that you understand what it means if a saber or sword suddenly breaks. Gao Xianji couldn't help but give a deep sigh. Wang Chang's idea was quite good, but it was simply unrealistic. Ideals and reality were two completely different things. This sort of saber could only remain in the realm of ideals. "Ah, my lord, since I designed this MO saber, I naturally considered this point. Since Lord Protector General believes that it will break, why don't you try and snap it in two?" Wang Chong grinned, his expression brimming with confidence. Gao Xianji froze, his eyes flickering with shock. But he quickly regained his composure. A saber breaking was a problem that had persisted for millennia. How could it be so easy to solve? But Gao Xianji didn't argue. Facts spoke louder than words, and it was easy to tell whether Wang Chang's saber was practical or not. Ding! Gao Xianji did not even turn his head. He extended a finger and gently flicked it at a spot 4 feet away from the MO saber. In that instant, a thunderous metallic sound suddenly came from the saber, reverberating throughout the entire study. A moment later, the indifferent Gao Xianji instantly paled. Although he had only casually flicked his finger, Gao Xianji was a top-class imperial great general, so this flick of his finger weighed more than 1,000 jin, equivalent to the fierce blow of a profound martial expert. Gao Xianji originally thought that with the length of the saber, coupled with the fact that the finger flicked the saber was the weakest and easiest to break, the MO saber would break easily. However, the final result was completely beyond his expectations. Bang! Without the slightest hesitation, Gao Xianji flicked his finger again, but this time, Gao Xianji's expression was much more solemn and serious. The strength of his finger was also many times greater than before, enough to snap many treasured sabers and swords, let alone this MO saber. Chapter 1038. How is this possible? Gao Xianji was dazed as he finally sensed the extraordinariness of this long saber. The fact that it could block 2 flicks from his finger meant that Wang Chang's new weapon was extremely mature. Just the toughness of the blade and the fact that it was not easy to break meant that the quality and level of this weapon had soared, surpassing the vast majority of weapons in the world. A good saber. Truly a good saber. I've never seen a saber that can break this rule. Wang Chong, I didn't think that you had this kind of ability. This is truly wonderful. As an illustrious imperial great general with more than 10 years of experience, Gao Xianji could almost instinctively sense the immense value of this long saber. Gao Xianji reached out and took the 8-foot-long MO saber from the embroidered box. After twirling it around in his hand, Gao Xianji's eyes grew brighter and brighter. This long saber was easy to hack, and its sturdy and unbreakable blade made it the overlord of sabers. A single long saber like this might not have been that dazzling, but if tens of thousands of people were equipped with this MO saber, it would become a dreadful flood of destruction on the battlefield. This long saber was a weapon born to rule over the battlefield. Wang Chong, how many of these weapons do you have? Gao Xianji turned to Wang Chong. He suddenly understood what Wang Chong meant by MO saber warriors. If he had an elite army fully equipped with this long saber designed by Wang Chong, their lethality would be unimaginable. Moreover, Gao Xianji only needed a glance to understand that this 8-foot-long blade was a weapon that Wang Chong had designed for infantry to deal with cavalry. If this saber slashed down, not only the warhorses, but also the riders riding them would be within the range of the MO saber. Gao Xianji could totally imagine the scene of men and horses being slaughtered on the battlefield. Zhang Shouji has already forged more than 100 of them. As long as you agree, all the craftsmen can work day and night. Within a month, all the MO sabers should be completed. Before that, I will have them use wooden sticks instead. Wang Chong said seriously. Wang Chang's Mo saber used many forging techniques that far surpassed those of this era. In terms of weapon materials, Wang Chong had gathered many Arabian scimitars from the battlefield, all of which were made from the finest steel. Coupled with the extraterrestrial meteoric iron and a small amount of Wuxi steel, the Mo saber now possessed multiple characteristics and became a true top-grade saber. Wang Chong, let's do as you wish. I will have the Anxi Protectorate Army fully cooperate with you. A strange light appeared in Gao Xianji's eyes as he made his decision. Rumble. Not even Gao Xianji had expected that the moment he agreed, the entire structure of war on the continent would change. An unprecedented type of soldier would step onto the stage of history. After sending off Gao Xianji, Wang Chong pushed open the door to his room and left. In the training ground in the northern part of Talas, Wang Chong saw Li Sai and more than 4,600 Wushang cavalry. Marquis. Upon seeing Wang Chong, Li Sai immediately urged his Fergana horse forward, one hand on his chest as he gave a deep bow. Are you ready? Wang Chong raised his head and asked. Marquis, be at ease. Everyone is waiting for Marquis's summons. Very good. Take these sheets of paper and have the Wushang cavalry train day and night. Our time is extremely limited. In 1 month, all of you must complete the training of this formation, Wang Chong said. Wang Chong nodded and sternly said, Your subordinate will do his utmost. Li Sai glanced at the paper, his pupils constricting upon seeing the method written on it. His expression turning grim, he bid farewell to Wang Chong and immediately galloped off. The Azura Hell. These were the contents of the 2 sheets of paper that Wang Chong had given him. Li Sai had been fortunate enough to hear from Wang Chong about the 10 great formations. Of these, the 10 charges 10 victories formation cultivated by the Wushang cavalry was ranked last, while the Azura Hell was ranked second. In the Lord's Hall of Talas, a door was pushed open, and Gao Xianji, dressed in the new armor that Wang Chong had forged, returned to his residence. After taking off the armor, Gao Xianji went to his desk and began to read through the documents. Just like Wang Chong, Gao Xianji had many military matters to attend to. The treatment of the wounded of the Anxi Protectorate Army, the distribution of logistics, the pacification of the Ferganians and Karluks, the repair of the city walls, the patrols of the scouts. There were far too many things that needed to be taken care of. By the time Gao Xianji finished reading through all the documents, it was already very late. Gao Xianji put the brush back on the brush holder and rubbed his eyes. He couldn't help but reveal a tired expression. Winds foretold a coming storm. Although Talas was currently calm, everyone could feel a powerful pressure. All of the 60,000 soldiers of the Tang dynasty were fighting for every second, doing their utmost to strengthen themselves in preparation for the crueler war that was to come. Milord has worked hard. Have a cup of tea and rest. There was a knock on the door, and a guard of the Anxi Protectorate walked in with a cup of tea. Put it down. Gao Xianji lightly rapped on the desk. After the guard left, Gao Xianji picked up the fragrant tea on the table. Just as he was about to take a sip, he suddenly glanced at the 2 thin pieces of paper on the table. A thought flashed through his mind. It's the technique that Wang Chong spoke of. At Gao Xianji's level of cultivation, it was very difficult to advance any further. Almost instinctively, Gao Xianji did not believe that there was anything that could help him. But in the end, Gao Xianji could not bear to brush away Wang Chong's good intentions. Let's take a look. Gao Xianji shook his head and smiled. He absent-mindedly picked up the 2 letters and glanced at them. However, with just one glance, Gao Xianji felt as if he had been pricked by a needle. His entire body quivered and all his tiredness instantly disappeared without a trace. How could something like this happen? Gao Xianji stared at the words on the paper. When the mind is one, sword qi enters the void. These short words were exactly the same as one of the mantras in the 6 Ultimate Majesty's God art that Gao Xianji cultivated. Gao Xianji abruptly sat up straight and continued reading. His expression became more and more serious and more solemn. When he finished reading the last word, Gao Xianji let out a long sigh and slowly raised his head, remaining silent for a long time. The hall was silent, but at this moment, Gao Xianji's heart was in turmoil. The technique that Wang Chong had given him was actually 30 to 40% similar to Gao Xianji's own martial arts, but the power was even stronger than Gao Xianji's own technique. It was like an upgraded version of Gao Xianji's technique. Gao Xianji had never encountered this kind of situation before. Although the two were different, there must be an extremely deep connection between them. I have already exhausted all my efforts to search for this lineage of techniques, but there were no other derivative techniques. Could it be that I was wrong? The 6 ultimate majesties God art that I cultivate is actually just a derivative version of an even more ancient technique, and there is a more powerful technique above it? Gao Xianji held the 2 thin sheets of paper as he muttered to himself, his mind in turmoil. The study was quiet, but there was an enormous flow of energy swirling around Gao Xianji. Gao Xianji lowered his head and read the contents of the 2 sheets of paper several times. In the end, his mind was completely absorbed. After some time, bang! The 2 heavy doors seemed to be pulled apart by some invisible force, and all the tables and chairs in the hall had been removed. Gao Xianji sat cross-legged on the floor, his body exuding an enormous energy. The stellar energy in Gao Xianji's body began to slowly surge in a direction it had never experienced before. Congratulations to user for obtaining the heart of the general and obtaining Gao Xianji's favor, resulting in a slight change in the history of the war. Reward: 100 points of destiny energy. At the same time, in the training ground to the north of Talas, the Stone of Destiny's voice suddenly rang out in Wang Chong's mind. Wang Chong suddenly turned his head to look in the direction of the Lord's Hall of Talas, where a surge of energy was rising into the sky, and a smile appeared on his face. Everything was on the right track. In the apocalyptic era, based on Gao Xianji's 6 ultimate majesties God art, the 8 ultimate sunderings art, which had been created by the combined power of many supreme experts, had appeared 20-some years earlier in this life and returned to Gao Xianji's hands. History had taken a subtle turn, and Wang Chong's hand had caused it to deviate once more from its original path. The 8 ultimate sunderings art had strict requirements for its cultivation. The cultivator had to be at least a great general level, and it would take at least 1 month from start to finish without any disturbance. This was also why Wang Chong had not initially given the 8 ultimate sunderings art to Gao Xianji. Tell Cheng Qianli to send more men. No one is allowed to get within 100 zhang of the Lord's residence. Wang Chong turned his head and ordered a Qishi messenger at his side. Yes, my lord. Time slowly passed, and while everyone was busy preparing for battle at Talas, 60-some li away, the Western Turkic camp was also fraught with tension. Rumble. Thunder boomed through the heavens, and above the Western Turkic camp, thunderclouds were roiling and churning, clouds gathering from all around. At the place where the thunderclouds were most turbulent, a pillar of azure energy soared through the heavens and earth, making it extremely conspicuous. Looking down along the cyan pillar of Qi, a tall and sturdy figure with a domineering aura floated in midair. This figure was dressed in heavy armor, a black cloak flapping in the wind. His entire body exuded a domineering aura. Chapter 1039. Great General. Great General! Great General! Earth-shattering shouts resounded in all directions. At this moment, Duwussili was like a god in their eyes. Ever since he had started cultivating formation phenomena, everyone had sensed that Duwussili's aura was getting stronger and stronger. With each passing day, the pressure exuding from his body grew stronger and stronger. Crackle! Suddenly, a blazing bolt of lightning struck down from the center of the formation phenomena, striking Duwussili down below. With a hiss, Duwussili's body crackled with electricity, but Duwussili was able to absorb all of it. Bolt after bolt of lightning descended, and Duwussili's aura once more began to swell under the effects of this lightning. After a long while, the formation phenomena in the sky began to weaken, and Duwussili finally opened his eyes. That pitch-black Turkic steed slowly descended with Duwussili. Formation phenomena truly are powerful. In just a few short moments, my strength has risen once more. Duwussili slowly raised his head, his eyes exuding a sharp light. Duwussili had been a great general for a very long time, and it had not taken Dewissely much time to rise from the initial level of great general to the ranks of the elite great generals. But it would not be so easy to advance any further. Dewissely had never imagined that his strength could rise again. It was simply inconceivable. Congratulations, great general. Your strength has risen to another level. In the future, not even Abu Muslim will be a match for great general. Now that you've cultivated formation phenomena, the Kagan is certain to value Milord even more. Even great general Wunu Shibi will have to lower his head before great general. Shamshak and Chechen Benba hurriedly went to greet Dewissely. Wunu Shibi was the Western Turkic war god, just like the Uzun great general Witadra Konglo and the Tang dynasty's Wang Zhongxi. In the Western Turks, he was also known as the Sun Great General, one of the few existences capable of surpassing Dewissely. Dewissely had once clashed with him over the issue of military authority. There's no need for you two to flatter me. With my current strength, defeating Wunu Shibi won't be that easy. However, if I hadn't obtained the Sun God art and its mantra, Wunu Shibi might not have been able to surpass me. Dewissely said coldly. Although he was brimming with hostility toward Wunu Shibi, Dewissely had to admit that Wunu Shibi was truly the strongest great general of the Western Turks. Shamshak and Chechen Benba's eyes flickered, but they did not continue speaking. General, the formation phenomena we've been practicing have already begun to take shape. His Excellency's strength is also stronger than before. When are we going to destroy the Tang dynasty again? Shamshak suddenly said. There's no rush. Dewissely waved his hand and calmly said, I've only just begun my cultivation. If I want to display my full power, I must end my cultivation and wait for my cultivation to completely stabilize. Before that, without my order, you are forbidden from fighting with the Tang people. Yes. Now that this was a serious matter, Shamshak and Chechen Benba did not dare to tarry and bowed. Shamshak, what's the range of the army's guard? Dewissely sternly said. 20 li. We've already dispatched 20 waves of cavalry to patrol the area day and night, and we've also dispatched golden eagles to patrol the skies. As long as the Tang people get close, we'll immediately know if there's even the slightest sign of trouble. Shamshak bowed and respectfully said. Increase the army's guard to 60 li. From Talas to here, I want you to patrol day and night. You can't give the Tang people any chances or openings. In addition, double the number of people patrolling the perimeter. If it's at night, double the number. The Tang people like to attack at night. Until I've successfully cultivated formation phenomena, I don't want any of the Tang people to appear before me. Dewissely sternly said. Yes, milord. Everyone lowered their heads. With everything in place, Dewissely's expression finally relaxed. In addition, send a letter to Daluin Ruozan and ask for his opinion. In Talas, no one understands the Tang people more than he does. Your subordinate will go. While Dewissely was waiting for Daluin Ruozan's reply, he could never have imagined that the Uzun camp was already abuzz with rage. Bastard! This Dewissely is too despicable. He's using such a despicable method to deal with us. In the Uzun camp. Bang! Hwaba Senji slammed his fist on the table, unable to restrain his rage. After observing the Western Turks for 6 to 7 days, he had finally managed to obtain the 3 sheets of paper from Daluin Ruozan. But Hwaba Senji had never imagined that the most crucial part of the paper would be missing a few words. Just the difference of a few words was enough to turn these 3 precious pieces of paper into waste paper. No, I have to go find him. No matter what, I have to make him hand over the true formation phenomena. Hwaba Senji grabbed the papers and was about to go find Dewissely, but a moment later, a white and powerful hand reached out from the side and blocked Hwaba Senji's path. Wait a moment. Huashu Wuzong slightly shook his head and shot a glance at Hwaba Senji. Hwaba Senji paused and turned his head, subconsciously looking at Daluin Ruozan, his brow deeply furrowed and his face pensive. The tent was quiet as all the generals looked to Daluin Ruozan, but Daluin Ruozan seemed to be completely unaware of their gazes, still deep in thought. In truth, even if we go find Dewissely, we'll find it very difficult to get anything out of his hands. He truly did hand over the formation phenomena to us, and all 4 of us were present at the time. Even if we say that he tampered with the papers, we don't have any concrete evidence, and Dewussili will never admit to it. In the tent, the silent Dusong Mangpoj suddenly spoke up. Dewussili's methods truly were displeasing, but the four of them were also at fault, and they could not completely blame Dewussili. Hwaba Senji's face froze, and he was momentarily speechless. But Dewussili clearly tricked us. Are we just going to let it go? Hwaba Senji unwillingly said. As the commander of the Mutri Great Cavalry, Hwaba Senji had never suffered such a loss before, and Dewussili had tampered with the papers in front of the four of them. That's not what I'm worried about right now, a voice suddenly resounded through the tent. Daluan Ruozan suddenly spoke, and as he spoke, he slowly raised his head. I've always felt that this matter isn't that simple. Dewussili obtained the formation phenomena far too easily and smoothly. When Dewussili's strength began to rise, I felt even more strongly. Things going too smoothly is not necessarily a good thing. Moreover, Wang Chong is not the sort of person who would so easily hand over something that he's formidable to someone else. If the formation phenomena were fake, wouldn't it be even more inconceivable that it could increase Dewussili's strength? Dusong Mangpoj said. This is also why I've never been able to determine whether it's true or not. Daluan Ruozan sternly said. There were very few things that he was unsure of, but when it came to formation phenomena, Daluan Ruozan truly had no way of determining whether it was real or fake. If this matter really is as I think, then this young marquis of the Tang dynasty is up to something big. Dewussili is probably going to suffer at his hands. The eyes of the trio in the tent imperceptibly flickered. Up until now, there had been no sign that was worthy of Daluan Ruozan's suspicion. On the contrary, everything pointed to the authenticity of the formation phenomena. But even so, no one dared to ignore the intuition of a wise man until the truth was confirmed. Hwaba Senji, take this simplified version of the formation phenomena and cultivate it. Let me think about the rest. If I can't give you an answer in a month, or if the formation phenomena really are real, I will go find Dewussili and ask for the real formation phenomena. Daluan Ruozan raised his head. This fine. Hwaba Senji hesitated for a few moments before finally nodding. In the current situation, this was the best method. Moreover, Hwaba Senji had never looked down on Daluan Ruozan's promises. Since he had promised to find the real formation phenomena, he would definitely do it. But as they were discussing, the neighing of Nei's horse came from outside the tent, mixed with the sounds of chaos. They had not paid much attention at the start, but as the chaos grew, they could occasionally hear the shouts of soldiers. What's going on? Has the Tang dynasty decided to launch a sneak attack? Hwaba Senji asked in alarm. Uzan's people were very disciplined, and with Daluan Ruozan present, they were usually very orderly, with no problems occurring unless they were attacked by outsiders. Prime Minister, I'll go out and take a look. Dusong Mangpoj's brow creased as he rushed out of the tent, vanishing in the blink of an eye. Dusong Mangpoj was the eagle of the plateau, an expert of the great general level. They had originally believed that with his appearance, the chaos would quickly subside, but they had not expected what would happen next. Prime Minister, hurry and come out and take a look. Dusong Mangpoj's voice suddenly came from outside the tent, his voice extremely solemn. Outside the tent, the neighing of the warhorses had not only not weakened, but had grown even louder. Within the tent, Daluan Ruozan, Huashu Wizong, and Hwaba Senji glanced at each other in dismay. Daluan Ruozan quickly stood up from the table. Let's go. Chapter 1040. This is... Daluan Ruozan couldn't help but raise an eyebrow as he looked at the chaotic scene in the rear, a solemn expression on his face. The northern part of the Uzan encampment was filled with howling winds and an incomparably cold white mist. At some point in time, it had swept in from the north. Under the influence of this cold current, the temperature of the entire Uzan encampment plummeted. When the white mist spread across the sky, it immediately affected the Uzan army. From where Daluan Ruozan stood, he could see that more than 1/5 of the encampment was shrouded in mist. Not a single person could be seen, and this cold mist was still rapidly spreading across the entire encampment. It's so cold. What's going on? I can't see anything, help me. Warhorses are afraid of the cold, I can't control them. No, they've escaped. The entire encampment was in chaos. Many of the stronger soldiers didn't feel much of the cold mist, but some of the weaker Uzun soldiers began to shiver from the cold. Bastards! You pieces of trash, can't you even hold back a warhorse? Hoba Senji flew into a rage. Before anyone could react, he suddenly pulled a warhorse over, mounted it, and charged into the area where the mist was thickest in the distance. Several Mutri great cavalry soldiers followed closely behind him. Prime Minister, it's not yet time for it to snow, so why is the temperature dropping? Is this normal? Huoshu Wuzong suddenly asked. The Uzun people had some understanding of the western regions. Usually, the temperature would drop just before it started snowing, but there were still at least 2 months before it started. Daluan Ruozan didn't say anything. His eyes flickered as he vaguely thought of something, but he couldn't quite grasp it. Look! While he was deep in thought, a sudden cry rang out. At first, no one paid much attention, but gradually, the commotion grew louder and louder. Countless soldiers raised their heads, as if noticing something. Prime Minister, look at the sky. Suddenly, a voice came from beside him. Even Huoshu Wuzong couldn't help but raise his head and look at the sky. Daluan Ruozan's heart trembled slightly. He couldn't help but raise his head and follow everyone's gaze. When he saw the source of the exclamations, even Daluan Ruozan couldn't help but feel his heart tremble violently. Black sun corrosion. In the sky, in the depths of the clouds, a dim red sun hung high in the sky, and in the core of the sun, there were clearly a few huge round black spots, as if a few of them had been corroded. Oracle! This was not Daluan Ruozan's voice, but Dusong Mangpoj and Huoshu Wuzong's. The two of them stared at the black speck of the sun in the sky in unprecedented shock. How is this possible? The prophecy of the divine temple really came true. Dusong Mangpoj muttered to himself. At this moment, all three of them had the same thought. Black sun corrosion. Three-eyed golden crow. Horse treads on white frost. This was the news that had come from the highest oracle of the Uzun Empire. After receiving 3 identical oracles saying that danger rises from the east, that Senpo had paid an enormous price to use a shaman to obtain more information. Every 6,000 years, the Uzun Plateau would undergo a massive transformation. All the civilization on the plateau would be wiped away and everything would return to its original state. Before this calamity, 3 kinds of abnormal phenomena would appear, and the black sun corrosion was the beginning of everything. According to the contents of the oracle, if all 3 phenomena occurred, the Uzun Empire and the civilization it represented would be completely obliterated from the face of the world. At this moment, Daluan Ruozan, Huoshu Wuzong, and Dusong Mangpoj, the 3 supreme figures of the Uzun Empire, felt their hearts sink. Great Minister, could it be that what the oracle said will really happen? Dusong Mangpoj stood at Daluan Ruozan's side, his expression grave. Whether or not it will happen, we won't let it happen. Isn't that our goal in coming here? Daluan Ruozan raised his head. Dusong Mangpoj nodded, saying nothing more. The sun was the purest and most unyielding existence in the world, brimming with boundless energy. It was pure and devoid of impurities, and no one had ever seen such a phenomenon. Black sun corrosion was not something that would normally occur. Not too long ago, everyone had believed that the oracle was very far from them, but now, when they saw the black sun corrosion in the sky, they all felt a direct threat. Either you die or I die. The danger rises from the east, and all threats originate from the Tang dynasty. If we want to avoid the calamity of the oracle, we must destroy the Tang dynasty. No matter what, we must win this battle. Dusong Mangpoj quietly said to himself, his eyes inadvertently glancing at Daluan Ruozan and Huoshu Wuzong. Dusong Mangpoj knew that the two of them were thinking the same thing. The signs had already appeared. If they wanted to avoid the fate of the Zhangsheng dynasty from several thousand years ago, Uzun could only defeat the Tang dynasty, and Tala's would be the most crucial battle. In the sky, endless clouds surged over from all directions. The dim red sun only existed for a short moment before it completely disappeared. the world suddenly became much colder. Neither Daluan Ruozan nor Dusong Mangpoj knew that this would be the last time they would see the sun this winter. Bzizi. A white torrent of cold air swept through the Uzan camp. At almost the same time, the western Turkic camps several dozen li away, the distant city of Talas, and the entire northern region were shrouded in a white fog. It's starting so soon? On the training ground in the northern part of the city of Talas, the banner representing the Tang dynasty fluttered in the wind. Beneath the banner, Wang Chong gazed at the white fog and muttered to himself. At this moment, no one but himself knew what he was thinking. Flap flap. Wings flapped through the sky. Not even Daluan Ruozan had expected that with the appearance of the black erosion of the sun, something unexpected would occur. At dusk, eagles descended from the sky, bringing news from the Uzan Plateau. The last two of the three major training camps of the Uzan Plateau, the Yarlung royal lineage, the great clans of the plateau, and the many valiant generals of the plateau had all sent letters expressing their support for Daluan Ruozan. The appearance of the black erosion of the sun had made all the ancient clans and factions of the Uzan Plateau feel a sense of panic and threat. Even though the plateau was in a state of extreme shortage of soldiers, all these ancient clans and factions were doing their utmost to assist Daluan Ruozan. A total of 40,000 elite soldiers were setting off from the plateau to the city of Talas to reinforce Daluan Ruozan. While Daluan Ruozan, Duwisili, Wang Chong, and the others were still enduring the onslaught of the south, in the distant Khorasan to the south, waves of heat were roiling in the distance. Boom! Ha! In the sky above the governor's residence in the center of Khorasan, thick smoke roiled and flames raged. Muscular and bare-chested Arab blacksmiths stood in a circle, their hands gripping heavy hammers that they raised high and then hammered down, creating countless sparks. Boom boom boom. The sounds of the hammers resounded through the air. As these Arab blacksmiths hammered around the clock, armor pieces were slowly taking shape on the metal platforms. Nearby, Ibak looked at the bustling scene in the courtyard and nodded in satisfaction. Not bad. In 1 month, all 10,000 sets of armor should be finished. When the time comes, we will become the strongest existence in the history of the Mamluks. At this moment, Ibak's eyes exploded with ambition. The Mamluks had always been the strongest force of the Arabian Empire, but with the meteoric star medal delivered by the high priest, an even stronger Mamluk army would appear in his hands. Equipped with the full set of meteoric star armor and the formidable fighting power of the Mamelukes, there would be no force on the continent that could contend against the Mamelukes, not even the so-called Wushang cavalry of the east. Faisal, has the Sindhi Hyderabad arrived? Ibak's eyes were like lightning as he stood on the high steps, not even turning his head. Milord, it is still on the way. In 3 days, it will reach Khorasan and can be tempered at any time. Ghassani is personally leading the escort team, so there won't be any problems. A Mamluk officer with a hawk-like nose and a black crescent moon earring in his left ear spoke. He had a sharp gaze and appeared extremely dangerous. Faisal was the deputy commander of the Mamluk army, the second in command of the army. It was rumored that while conquering a powerful country in the north of the Arabian Empire, Faisal had accidentally separated from the main force and fallen into a tight encirclement. By the time the Mamelukes found him, he had been fighting for 7 days and nights in the enemy's territory. Corpses had piled up around him, including those of the enemy commanders who had lured him there. The blood flowing from these corpses dyed the streets of the city red. Faisal became famous in this battle and was called the Eagle of the God of Death. Very good. Ibak's eyes flashed with a bright light. Ghassani was the third in command of the Mamluks, a peak brigadier general whose fighting power rivaled that of a great general. With him escorting them, there would be no problems. Even if the rebel army that had been conquered by the Arabs wanted to do something, they would never succeed. Tell Ghassani that if he encounters any rebel army survivors while transporting the Hyderabad kill them all. Yes, my lord. Chapter 1041. Hyderabad ore was extremely rare and produced at a very low rate. Because of its unique characteristics, it had become a target for the remnants of the dynasties conquered by Arabia to attack and plunder. The Arabs had not yet reached the level of the Tang dynasty's use of Hyderabad ore, but through long experiments, they had gradually developed a method to temper Hyderabad ore and fuse it with other metals, greatly increasing their sharpness. Although the weapons forged through this method could not reach the level of the Tang dynasty's Wuxi steel swords that could even cut through the skyquaking army's dark green god armor, they had already surpassed almost all the Arabian swords and sabers of the past, reaching an even higher level of sharpness. Even if the weapons forged through this method could not compare to the weapons of the Wuxi steel swords of the Mamelukes, even if they could not compare to the weapons of the Wuxi steel swords. At the very least, Aibak and Faisal were completely convinced. Gallop. After taking care of everything, just when Aibak was preparing to leave, he heard the galloping of hooves. A horseman suddenly charged into the courtyard. Stop! Fierce shouts echoed through the air as Mamelukes surged in from all directions, their sharp auras locking onto the intruder. At the outermost perimeter of the courtyard, 10 some Mamelukes stood in his way. The four sides cooperated, and in a flash the intruder was caught in a deadlock. Saber lights flashed and clanging sounds rang out incessantly. It would only take a moment for the intruder to die on the spot. Suddenly, Aibak glanced at the golden robe on the intruder's body, and his face instantly paled. Stop! For a moment, time seemed to freeze. All the drawn scimitars were suspended in the air, and the 10 some Mamelukes all stopped. Aibak had already descended from the stairs to meet the intruder. The Caliph's messenger. These knights wearing golden robes embroidered with complex designs were the messengers of the Caliph of the Arabian Empire. Every single one of them was a carefully selected and extremely loyal expert. They would only appear when they were carrying out extremely important missions that the Caliph of the Empire placed great importance on. Aibak. The golden-robed knight called out Aibak's name from atop his horse, his robes flapping in the wind. His face was covered with a silvery white mask that was full of tiny beeholes. He looked down from above and his voice was extremely cold. The Caliph has decreed that the Tang people of Talas must be destroyed. Once we succeed, the Mamluks will work with governors Qutayba, Abu Muslim, and Osman to continue eastward. Once we conquer the entire eastern world, the Mamelukes will obtain the Promised Land as their eternal fiefdom. Khalifa's messenger was concise and to the point, stating the purpose of his visit in one sentence. Swoosh! In an instant, the atmosphere in the backyard of the city lord's mansion changed. Before Aibak could speak, the second-in-command of the Mamelukes, Faisal, and the other Mamelukes in the rear paled. The Promised Land. This was the greatest desire of all the Mamelukes, but it had never been fulfilled. The Mamelukes were known as the strongest warriors of Arabia, the most loyal force, and they had rendered great service. Any other army or commander would have already been given their own fiefdom in the Arabian Empire. But the Mamelukes, for certain reasons from long ago, were restricted by an ancient imperial law and could not be rewarded. Thus, even though the Mamelukes were as famous as the midday sun and possessed peerless fighting power, they were like duckweed, running from place to place wherever there was war. They would never have a route. If they had a promised land, the Mamelukes would be able to recruit soldiers, station troops, train soldiers, collect taxes, manage businesses. They could even breed descendants, creating a massive Mamluk city. The Mamelukes would be able to break through the limit of 10,000 soldiers and reach an unprecedented golden age. This was the dream of all the Mamelukes. Milord! In the blink of an eye, the eyes of all the Mamelukes became fervent. Even Faisal found it hard to maintain his composure. He immediately stepped forward from the rear, his breathing becoming ragged. No one had expected the Caliph to place so much importance on the East, much less for him to be willing to break convention and offer such conditions for the sake of conquering the East. Aibak, this is His Majesty's token. With this token, the Caliph will keep his word. Take it. The golden-robed Caliph's messenger took out a black crescent moon-shaped metal token covered in many hollow carvings and threw it over. However, the Caliph has also sent word that this eastern expedition is the only chance for the Mamelukes to obtain the Promised Land. If we cannot pacify Talas and the East, all the Mamelukes will forever be slaves and will never be able to obtain the Promised Land. Buzz. Aibak and Faisal, the two highest commanders of the Mamelukes, trembled in shock, their expressions turning grave. "Your subordinate understands." The two lowered their heads. Time slowly passed. In Khorasan, the Arab craftsmen worked day and night to forge the Mamelukes' newest meteoric star armor. Meanwhile, on the front lines, Abu Muslim was doing his utmost to restrain his army, avoiding any conflict with the Tang dynasty as he waited for the two governors and the Mamelukes to arrive. Every day, there would be new news, and every day, countless soldiers would travel from Cairo and Tarsus to Khorasan to meet up with the Mamelukes and then head to the Black Forest to meet up with Abu Muslim. Meanwhile, in the distant Talas, tens of thousands of Tang soldiers were training day and night, their fires blazing and plumes of smoke billowing into the air. And no one knew that a group of nearly 10,000 soldiers, selected from the Anshi Protectorate Army, Chishi Protectorate Army, and the mercenaries of the various tribes, had formed the world's first Mo Saber army, and were currently in the middle of training. Every day, Talas would take on a new atmosphere. Under Wang Chang's command, all the soldiers of the Tang dynasty were preparing for battle. Several dozen li away, Dewussili was training day and night in the formation phenomena, using its lightning to temper himself and increase his strength so that he could reach an even higher level. 20 li away, the Uzun camp was calm, and Daluan Ruozan was leisurely sipping tea in his tent. But no one knew that across the Tsong Mountains, across the western regions, and onto the distant Uzun Plateau, a new Uzun army of around 40,000 soldiers was gathering from the various great clans and nobles of the plateau to prepare for Talas. Although the four empires and the three forces looked calm on the surface and restrained each other, in private, the undercurrents were more dangerous and treacherous than ever before. War could erupt at any moment. While the clouds of war were gathering over Talas, in the distant Central Plains, in the capital of the Great Tang, a different mood was taking place. In the imperial court, the debate over Talas had reached a fever pitch. Gao Xianji's and Wang Chang's memorials to increase the number of soldiers had never been passed. "Your Majesty, this subject objects." In the court, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue, Zheng Qingli, who had white hair at his temples and was past his prime, walked out of the ranks with a ceremonial tablet in his hand. "Since ancient times, I've only heard of reinforcements after defeat, but never of reinforcements after victory. Moreover, the imperial court deploys soldiers every year, spending an enormous sum. Last year, the Bureau of Military Personnel spent 80 million dan of grain, 10 million head of cattle and sheep, and 4 million feet of cloth. Last year, the Bureau of Military Personnel spent 94 million dan of grain, 17 million head of cattle and sheep, and 6 million feet of cloth. This year, the expenditure will only be even greater, and this does not even include the pensions for the soldiers killed in battle. The 600,000 soldiers of the Tang dynasty are frequently engaged in foreign wars, consuming vast amounts of the national treasury. They have already become a heavy burden on the Tang dynasty and its people. Not only that, the frequent wars have inflicted grievous casualties on the soldiers. In order to replenish the soldiers on the borders, we can only conscript soldiers from the common people. This lowly subject happened to learn that in some places, because the soldiers are of excellent quality, the army has been conscripted year after year, and there is even a rare phenomenon where the fields are in short supply. Correct. Assistant Minister of Revenue Zheng Qingli had barely finished speaking when the Grand Chamberlain, Zhou Taichin, gripping his ceremonial tablet, strode out from another line of ranks. This lowly subject has just returned from patrolling the East River and passed through Luzhou. There is a village called Zhouzhuang. On the way, I saw that besides the old, the weak, the women, and the children, there was not a single man in the village. This lowly subject was surprised and went forward to inquire. In the end, I learned that all the men in Zhouzhuang had been conscripted into the army. 2 years ago, Biding suffered a defeat in a battle against the Eastern Turkic Khaganate, resulting in 90% of the men in the village dying in that battle. The remaining 10% or so of the men have been conscripted to other places, including the Anshi Protectorate. Although the matter of Zhouzhuang is only an example, it is a microcosm of the Tang dynasty. The Anxi Protectorate already consumes a great deal of the national treasury each year, and the Central Plains sends innumerable soldiers each year. Now, Talas needs to be mobilized. Does the situation in Luzhou have to spread throughout the Tang dynasty, and even children are being dragged into the battlefield? This subject requests that the soldiers of Anxi and Qixi prefectures withdraw to the interior. Zhou Taiqin's voice was harsh and stern. These words caused the many civil officials in the court to agree. Correct, this subject agrees. This subject agrees. This subject agrees. Chapter 1042. In the 6th month of the 23rd year of the Holy Emperor's reign, the Biding Protectorate mobilized against the Eastern Turks and lost more than 79,000 men. In the 3rd month of the 24th year of the Holy Emperor's reign, the Anong Protectorate mobilized against the Shi and the Khitans and lost 35,000 men. In the 7th month of the same year, they attacked the Goguryeo Empire and lost 60,000 men. In the 25th year of the Holy Emperor's reign, at the beginning of spring, the Qixi Protectorate mobilized against the Uzan and lost 24,000 men. In the 9th month of the same year, they were ambushed by Dusong Mangpoj and lost more than 50,000 men. In the 26th year of the Holy Emperor's reign, Annan Protector General Zhangqiu Jianxiong mobilized against the Ngari royal lineage of the Uzan and lost 49,000 men. In the 7th month of the same year, they were ambushed by Dusong Mangpoj and lost more than 50,000 men. In this year's War of the Southwest, more than 143,000 men were killed or wounded. And now, not even a year has passed, yet another war has broken out at Talas. In just a few decades, there has never been a time when there has been no war. Your Majesty, it is time to stop. Talas is not the territory of the Tang dynasty, but a barren land beyond civilization. Fighting on the border is one thing, but do you want your soldiers to die in a foreign land? Moreover, the people of the western regions are all who? In order to maintain the rule of the Tang dynasty in the western regions, countless soldiers, money, and provisions are expended each year. It is a bottomless pit. But the western regions have offered very little to the Tang dynasty. Is it grapes? Pomegranates? Or the Hu merchants who fill the capital? Your Majesty, this lowly subject should not have spoken, but the war at Talas truly must stop. With these last words, the white-bearded old official beneath the crimson coiling dragon pillar respectfully bowed, his hands gripping his ceremonial tablet. Half of the imperial court was silent, all the civil officials looking at him with respect in their eyes. Grand Scribe Yan Wenzhang participated in the drafting of the imperial court's documents and was responsible for recording historical events and compiling history books. The words and actions of all the nobles and officials, including the imperial princes, were drafted by Yan Wenzhang and recorded into the annals of history. In the entire Tang dynasty, Yan Wenzhang was the most special existence among the civil and military officials. That was because, regardless of whether it was civil or military, if they said something inappropriate, it would be recorded in the annals of history by the Grand Scribe. It was very likely that they would go down in infamy for 10,000 years. No one wanted this to happen. Similarly, if a civil official wanted to leave his or her name in the annals of history, no matter how well he or she did, he or she could not record it himself. Instead, it had to go through the hands of the Grand Scribe. The Grand Scribe was the recorder of history, a bystander, and not a participant. Thus, he usually did not actively participate in the discussions of the imperial court. However, the Grand Scribe was still one of the hundreds of civil and military officials. When something important happened, the Grand Scribe would also participate in it and fulfill his duties as a courtier. A Grand Scribe was not allowed to speak more than 3 times in his or her entire life. Otherwise, he or she would have to step down and let his or her successor take over. This was also to maintain the fairness and objectivity of the Grand Historian, so that the records in the history books would not be influenced by personal feelings. This was only the 2nd time in Yan Wenzhang's life that he had participated in court politics. The first time was when the late emperor passed away. Throughout the ages, there had been disputes between civil and military officials, but it had rarely been this intense. It was clear that even the Grand Scribe had been alarmed. The Grand Scribe was from the Confucian school. Everyone knew that the Confucian school emphasized the cultivation of one's moral character, governing the country, and bringing peace to the world. In the end, it was all about the word peace. Yan Wenzhang was naturally a staunch anti-war. With his support, the words of the civil officials in the imperial court carried a completely different weight. As expected, the moment the Grand Scribe Yan Wenzhang's voice fell, the entire imperial court fell silent. All the military officials in the imperial court revealed expressions of dread. A civil official's pen can kill without leaving a trace. If they offended the Grand Scribe, it was very likely that they would be recorded in the annals of history and become a general who harmed the country. This was something that everyone had to consider. At this moment, a burst of laughter suddenly broke the silence. In the middle of the ranks, an old general in his 50s suddenly walked out. "Teacher Yan, this old man is throwing caution to the wind. If you want to record it, then record it. This old man is not afraid of death, so why would I fear that your pen will go down in infamy for 10,000 years? We military officials can't compare to you writers when it comes to the matters of the previous imperial court, but this old man still clearly remembers the matters of the current imperial court. In the 23rd year of the reign of the Holy Emperor, the Eastern Turks repeatedly plundered the borders and slaughtered the common people, even venturing deep into the Guanyi and Hedong circuits. It was precisely to stop them that the war began. Although more than 79,000 people died in that battle, the Eastern Turkic Khaganate also lost more than 110,000 elite soldiers. More importantly, after that battle, the Eastern Turkic Khaganate grew apprehensive and finally stopped advancing south. The deaths of more than 79,000 people were exchanged for 20-some years of peace in the Guanyi and Hedong circuits, saving more than 79,000 people? This old man remembers that battle very clearly because this old man was there. Beacon General Jiang Yunrang sternly said. Although he did not have a high position, Jiang Yunrang was a veteran of the army who had participated in many battles. At a time like this, when everyone feared Grand Scribe Yan Wenzhang, only a veteran like Jiang Yunrang would throw caution to the wind. Why did our soldiers on the front lines fight bloody battles and risk their lives? Was it so that you could censure them in the rear and condemn them? In the 23rd year of the reign of the Holy Emperor, if not for that war, do you think that the number of casualties would have been so few? In the 3rd month of the 24th year of the reign of the Holy Emperor, the Anong Protectorate mobilized soldiers against the Shi and the Khitans, suffering 35,000 casualties. But do you know how many people the Tang dynasty would have lost if not for that war? The Shi and the Khitans are warlike and fond of plundering, and they lack respect for the Tang dynasty. Before that war, the Shi and the Khitans would frequently invade Yuzhou, plundering women and children, killing and wounding the common people. Many of the people of Yuzhou feared the Shi and the Khitans and fled into the interior. In 10 years, the population of Yuzhou fell from 500,000 to 80,000, and it was still dropping. If not for that war, Yuzhou would have long since become the territory of the Hu, not to mention the ambitious Shi and the Khitans who secretly colluded with Goguryeo. 24 years ago, they launched 3 raids into the interior, causing hundreds of thousands of casualties in Yuzhou. But in the 3rd month, the war with the Shi and the Khitans, and in the 7th month, the war with the Goguryeo Empire completely changed the balance of power in the northeast, breaking the alliance between the Shi, the Khitans, and Goguryeo, dispersing the attacks of all 3, allowing the Tang dynasty to firmly grasp the situation in the northeast. In addition, the common people were able to live and work in peace. In the following years, the common people multiplied, and the population of Yuzhou increased from 80,000 to the current 870,000, even more than before the war. As for the 25 and 26 years that followed, which war didn't break out because of time and events? Which war didn't bring lasting peace? Jiang Yunrang's expression was extremely agitated. That's right. And then there was the War of the Southwest. The ambitious king of Mengshi Zhao, Zhelifeng, secretly colluded with the Uzun great general Huishu Wizang and Daluan Ruozhen to form an alliance. If not for the young Marquis and the Annam Protectorate's bloody struggle, do Do you know what would have happened to the hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the Mengshi Yusang army marching north from the Arai? The nearly 1 million people of the southwest would have already been massacred by the Mengshi Yusang army. How could it possibly be as peaceful as it is now? Talas is in dire straits. The young Marquis and Lord Gao Xinji did not retreat after their victory because they pursued the policy of resisting the enemy on the outside. They did not wish for the people of the Tang dynasty and the western regions to be threatened by the Arabs, Uzan, and Western Turks. To benefit the country, one lives and dies. How can one avoid it because of misfortune or fortune? This is a couplet that the young Marquis has hung in his study. Who in the capital doesn't know of it? Could such a loyal subject and good general be one of those warlike warriors who disregard the lives of the common people that all of you speak of? Speed is of the essence in war. There are still tens of thousands of Tang dynasty soldiers waiting for reinforcements at Talas. This lowly subject requests that we immediately send reinforcements. The other generals couldn't help but get excited at Jiang Yunrong's words. Assistant Minister of War Chao Qianzong also stepped forward, his ceremonial tablet in hand. So what if the Grand Scribe recorded his name in the annals of history and infamy for 10,000 years? If some words were not said today, they would never have a chance to be said in the future. This lowly subject agrees. This lowly subject agrees. This lowly subject agrees. The generals in the court couldn't help but feel their blood boil at the words of Jiang Yunrang and Chao Qianzong. The civil officials did not love wealth, and the generals did not fear death. Which one of the generals standing here did not love their country with every fiber of their being? The Battle of Talas seemed like a dispute over a corner, but in reality, it concerned the safety of the entire Northwest and the Tang dynasty. At a time like this, no one could truly remain uninvolved. All the military officials stepped forward. Not to mention the Grand Scribe Yan Wenzhang, even the civil officials were stunned. From the time of the Holy Emperor's ascension to the present, and even back to Taizong's era, as long as the disputes of the imperial court involved civil and military officials, the vast majority of them would end with the generals backing down. But no one had expected that the generals would be so resolute this time. Even with the Grand Scribe present, even though they knew that they would be labeled as warmongers and go down in the annals of history, or even be criticized by future generations, they still didn't back down. Your Majesty, this subject has something to say. At this moment, a mellow voice resounded through the hall. Upon hearing this voice, all the civil and military officials, including the Grand Scribe Yan Wenzhang, instantly fell silent. They all turned to look at the figure, as if that person possessed some sort of invisible magic. The Minister of War, Zhangqiu Jianqiong, was also the previous Annan Protector General. In the entire military, Zhangqiu Jianqiong was one of the highest existences, and his words carried far more weight than anyone else's. In the 26th year of the Holy Emperor's reign, this lowly subject was still the Annan Protector General. It was this lowly subject's idea to attack the Uzan in the southwest, so this lowly subject has the right to speak on this matter. Zhangqiu Jianqiong, dressed in a violet court robe, walked out of the ranks. His head was lowered, his hand gripping his ceremonial tablet, and his expression was extremely solemn. Before this battle, this lowly subject's scouts reported that Daluan Ruozan and Huoshu Wuzong had gathered a large number of soldiers on the plateau of the Ngari royal lineage, preparing to attack the Tang dynasty. Ever since the reign of the previous emperor, the Uzan has constantly invaded the border. In the 16th year of the late emperor, war broke out in the southwest, killing 137,000 civilians. In the 21st year of Yuanwu, 210,000 civilians were caught up in the war, suffering grievous casualties. In the 29th year, 35th year, all the way until the first few years of this lowly subject's command, all wars were like this. Chapter 1043. Translator, Nyoibo Studio Editor. Nyoibo Studio Zhangqiu Jianqiong recounted the events of the battle. Many of the details were unknown to the important ministers of the court at the time. Even Grand Scribe Yan Wenzhang was hearing about it for the first time, and he hurriedly gestured toward the distance. A grand scribe was seated cross-legged at the foot of a pillar, swiftly writing down the details. War truly has no other choice. It is not that we generals like to fight, but that we are forced by the circumstances. The ultimate goal of war is to protect the common people. But there are many ways to protect the common people. One is to defend against the enemy from within and wait for the enemy to attack before mobilizing the army. Another is to defend against the enemy from without and proactively guard against war. It is just that the ministers are more inclined toward the former, while we have chosen the latter. There is no right or wrong, just a difference in ideals and methods. In addition, whether it is the former or the latter, as long as there is war, there will be casualties. There is no avoiding it. But there is one thing. Whether it is war or peace, we generals protect the Tang dynasty and protect the common people, just like all of you. Zhang Chou Jianxiong's voice was filled with utmost sincerity. The struggle between civil and military officials was a struggle between ideals of war and peace. As the Minister of War, Zhang Chou Jianxiong could not remain uninvolved. This lowly subject was not present at Talas and has no way of determining the exact situation, but this lowly subject believes in the young Marquis and believes in your Majesty's insight. Since the young Marquis and Protector General Gao Xianji have submitted a memorial to the court requesting reinforcements, the situation at Talas is assuredly extremely perilous. It is better to believe it than not, so this lowly subject requests your Majesty to immediately send reinforcements to the northwest to aid the young Marquis. Zhang Chou Jianxiong gave a long sigh, a weight lifted from his heart. In the War of the Southwest, Zhang Chou Jianxiong owed Wang Chong an enormous favor. If not for Wang Chong, Zhang Chou Jianxiong would not have been able to become the Minister of War, and those soldiers of the Annam Protectorate who had followed him for 10-some years would have been buried by the Arai. Zhang Chou Jianxiong had returned this favor with the Battle of Talas. More importantly, Zhang Chou Jianxiong had his own judgment of the Battle of Talas. As a famed general of the army and a top-class imperial great general of the Tang dynasty, Zhang Chou Jianxiong's judgment was exactly the same as Wang Chong's. If he did not quickly reinforce the northwest and allow the three sides to form an alliance, the entire Central Plains would be shaken. Ridiculous! You generals have been waging wars for years, wasting manpower and resources. Yet, you are still able to speak of such great principles. Lord Zhang Chou sure is eloquent. Lord Wang, do you think so as well? A voice sounded, and it immediately drew everyone's attention to the frowning Wang Zhen. Thump. Sensing the gazes of the crowd, Wang Chang's big uncle, Wang Zhen, felt his heart skip a beat, and his face darkened. In the entire imperial court, no one was in a more delicate and awkward position than his. Wang Zhen had always been a civil official, belonging to the civil path, but Wang Yan, Wang Fu, and Wang Chong were classic military generals. The Wang clan was both civil and military, a typical clan of ministers and generals. And if one looked further back, the source of all this was Duke Jiao. Although Duke Jiao was a civil official, he was skilled in military strategy, and he had led an army to sweep through the eastern and western Turks and Uzan, achieving great feats on the battlefield. Furthermore, the reason why this civil and military conflict had grown so large that even the Grand Scribe had gotten involved was because of Wang Chong of the Wang clan. For the first time, Wang Zhen found himself in an unprecedented predicament. In his many years of involvement in the court, Wang Zhen had weathered many storms, some of which were enough to threaten the entire Wang clan and uproot it. Whether it was the regional commander's incident or the consort Taijin incident, they had both surpassed this Battle of Talas. But Wang Zhen would rather face that situation than get caught up in this thorny conflict between civil and military. The civil officials hated war, and this was an unchanging principle. As long as Wang Zhen said the word war and went against the opinions of the civil officials, he would be ostracized by them. Without the support of the civil officials, Wang Zhen's path on the civil path would come to an end. And if Wang Zhen supported the civil officials, the hearts of the generals of the world would turn cold. The reason why this civil and military conflict was so intense, why Jiang Yunrang and the other old officials of the army were willing to risk being condemned by the civil officials, was precisely to support the Wang clan and Wang Zhen's nephew, Wang Chong, who was far away at Talas. If Wang Zhen opposed the generals at this time, not only would the Wang clan fall into disgrace, it would also send Wang Chong to his death. At this moment, Wang Zhen was in a dilemma, his mind warring with the heavens. Lord Wang, there is no need to feel troubled. Allow me to speak for you. At this moment, an elderly and dignified voice came from the upper reaches of the hall. Wang Zhen's heart trembled at this voice. All the civil and military officials turned in shock to the upper reaches of the hall. The Grand Preceptor. The same thought flitted through their minds as they stared at the figure seated on the red sandalwood chair. At the top of the hall, the Grand Preceptor, who had been meditating with his eyes closed this entire time, had at some point opened his eyes, a sharp light exploding from them. The Grand Preceptor, Grand Tutor, and Grand Protector were known as the three dukes of the imperial court, and the Grand Preceptor was their leader. The Grand Preceptor was a person of virtue and prestige, wielding enormous influence in the court. Even the Holy Emperor had to treat him with the utmost respect. At each morning court session, all the civil and military officials would stand in line. Only the Grand Preceptor had the Holy Emperor arrange a red sandalwood chair for him, placing it closest to the Holy Emperor as a sign of respect. The Grand Preceptor was very old, and he rarely interfered in the affairs of the court. The majority of the time, he would sit in the hall and listen, sometimes appearing, sometimes not. Everyone had believed that the Grand Preceptor would only sit in the hall and listen, but no one had expected the Grand Preceptor to intervene in the conflict between civil and military officials that had arisen from the Talas incident. The Grand Preceptor was the leader of the civil officials, and his sudden intervention in the imperial court immediately carried a different weight. Damn it! What's going on here? Even the Grand Preceptor has come. At this moment, even Zhangqiu Jianqiong couldn't help but feel shocked and have a bad premonition. Although he was the Minister of War and possessed enormous authority, in terms of prestige and influence in the court, Zhangqiu Jianqiong was far inferior. Your Majesty, this old subject only has one word. On the red sandalwood chair, the Grand Preceptor flicked his wide sleeves and slowly stood up. In that instant, a tremendous aura, as vast as the mountains and as vast as the seas, erupted from his body. In that instant, the entire hall fell silent, so silent that even a pin drop could be heard. Countless gazes were focused on him. Although the country is large, warmongering is sure to perish. Rumble. The Grand Preceptor's gaze swept over all the civil and military officials, his dignified voice echoing through the hall. All the ministers, including the old General Jiang Yunrang who had been at loggerheads with the civil officials, felt their hearts throbbing and were speechless. The hall was quiet, the atmosphere oppressive to death. Wang Zhen's heart felt heavy, like a boulder was weighing down on it. Behind the pillar, the King of Song also had a nasty grimace. From the moment the Grand Preceptor opened his eyes to the moment he stood up, he had only said a few words, but the weight of these words was far greater than the words of all the civil officials in the imperial court put together. The weight of these words was not something that any general could bear. Grand Preceptor. The King of Song's body trembled as he stared up at the Grand Preceptor, his heart freezing. The Grand Preceptor was a person of virtue and prestige, his status extremely high, and his influence profound. He did not lightly participate in the imperial court, much less speak. But once he opened his mouth, his words were equivalent to the Golden Rule and Jade Rule. Even though the King of Song was an imperial prince, he could not compare to the Grand Preceptor. The King of Song had never expected that this conflict between civil and military officials would draw out the leader of the civil path. This conflict in the imperial court had suddenly become extremely disadvantageous to all the generals. More importantly, Wang Chong and Gao Xinji's request for reinforcements at Talas had taken a massive turn, placing them in an extremely passive and disadvantageous position. The King of Song, do you have something to say? Just when King Song's heart sank and he felt that something was wrong, the Grand Master suddenly turned his gaze to King Song. What are you talking about? King Song asked. His expression was cold, his eyes icy. The King of Song was a staunch supporter of war. This was a fact known to all in the court, so how could the Grand Preceptor not know? It was obvious that the Grand Preceptor, as the leader of the three dukes, was dissatisfied with the imperial court's successive years of war, and he was using this Tala's incident to explode his discontent. Grand Preceptor. The King of Song hesitated, but before he could finish speaking, he was interrupted. Your Highness the King of Song, you don't intend to repeat the events of King Wu of Han in this dynasty, do you? The Grand Preceptor indifferently said with a wave of his sleeve. The King of Song's heart trembled, and he immediately swallowed back the words that had been on the verge of leaving his mouth. The events of King Wu of Han referred to a wise ruler from 1,000 years ago, Great Emperor Wu of Han, who had expanded the borders of the empire and accomplished great feats in both civil and martial arts. But in his later years, the years of war had left the people destitute, and the lands of the Central Plains were left uncultivated. When the Grand Preceptor mentioned the events of King Wu of Han, he was clearly referring to the Holy Emperor. The Holy Emperor had been wise for his entire life, and he had forged a golden age for the Tang dynasty, giving the Tang dynasty an unprecedented golden age. If the events of King Wu of Han were to repeat themselves in this dynasty, the Holy Emperor's wisdom would be destroyed in a single day. Not even the King of Song could bear the consequences. Your Holiness, Talas is still a land beyond the borders of civilization. Victory is not enough to celebrate, but defeat could cause all our previous efforts to be for naught. This old subject believes that Lord Gao and the young Marquis can withdraw their soldiers. With these final words, the Grand Preceptor finally turned his head to the Holy Emperor, hidden behind the curtain of beads. The hall was quiet for a long time. Finally, the Holy Emperor spoke from behind the curtain. These simple words were suffused with boundless majesty, causing the entire hall to tremble. We understand. These 4 words were devoid of emotion, but all the generals in the hall, including the King of Song, Wang Zhen, and Zhangzhou Jianxiong, felt their hearts sink. The sage emperor had always left the matters of the imperial court to the officials. He rarely interfered, much less expressed his opinion. Chapter 1044. The Grand Preceptor was the head of the 3 dukes and the leader of the civil officials. It was clear that his words had already begun to affect the Holy Emperor. Although it was just, "we understand," and did not express his stance, this was a massive change and favor compared to the previous struggles of the court. Not good. The generals in the hall felt their hearts sink. With the weight of the Grand Preceptor, the Holy Emperor was clearly beginning to lean toward the civil officials. The situation at Talas was urgent, and several urgent letters requesting reinforcements had already arrived. If they could not pass the resolution and send troops to Talas, Wang Chong and Gao Xianji were almost certain to lose. These were 2 imperial protector generals. Up in the hall, the sage emperor was just about to make his decision when a light breeze blew in. At the same time, a voice could be heard in the ears of everyone present. "You're the sage emperor, you're the sage emperor. Your Majesty, this old subject has something to say." As these words were spoken, a warm energy, like the warm sun bathing the earth, appeared in everyone's perception. In a flash of light, an elderly figure dressed in a white robe and dressed in white robes stepped over the threshold and slowly walked in. What? The sight of this figure caused the hall to fall into an uproar. "Duke Jiao!" It was unknown who cried out, but in that instant, all the generals erupted, and the many civil officials were stunned. Even in the Great Hall, Grandmaster, who was just about to turn around and sit down, his entire body shook, his heart abruptly sinking. Duke Jiao of the Tang dynasty, a virtuous minister of the Golden Age, the most respected and virtuous existence in the entire Tang dynasty. Even though he had abdicated decades ago and lived in seclusion in the Four Quarters Embassy, he still possessed enormous influence and prestige in society. In this aspect, not even the Grand Preceptor could compare to him, and the name Duke Jiao was enough to represent everything. "Father!" Wang Zhen stood in the hall, his heart trembling. He had not expected his father to appear at a time like this. Just as he was about to go over, Duke Jiao shot him a glance, causing him to stop in his tracks. "Grand Preceptor, long time no see." Wang Jiuling leaned on his walking stick and smiled as he looked at the palace. He then stepped forward. Duke Jiu! Duke Jiu! Duke Jiu! Seeing this old man, all of the officials in the hall, regardless of whether they were of the civil path or the martial path, respectfully lowered their heads and retreated to the sides, opening a path for Duke Jiu. Even an existence like Grand Scribe Yan Wenzhang had a serious expression on his face. He respectfully bowed and retreated to the side. As one of the founders of the flourishing Tang dynasty, Duke Jiu's influence in the imperial court was unimaginable. Many of the ministers in the imperial court had grown up listening to Duke Jiu's legends. Clack, clack. Duke Jiu held a white wooden walking stick in his hand as he slowly walked into the hall. The clear sound of his walking echoed throughout the hall. Jiuling greets your majesty. After walking several dozen feet, Duke Jiu suddenly stopped and bowed slightly. He faced the figure behind the bead curtain at the top of the hall and respectfully bowed. You've come as well. A voice came from the top of the hall. The voice was still lofty and majestic, but it carried a hint of gentleness. The Holy Emperor and Duke Jiu, one monarch and one minister, the monarch benevolent and the minister respectful, brought out the best in each other. Together, they had founded the Tang dynasty for 30 years, an unprecedented flourishing era that had become a legend of the Tang dynasty. Although Duke Jiu had already resigned from his post and retired for several decades, he still carried an extraordinary weight in the hearts of the imperial court and the Holy Emperor. On the other side, the Grand Preceptor's heart sank. Although Duke Jiu and the Holy Emperor had only exchanged a few simple words, the friendship between the monarch and the minister made the Grand Preceptor's eyelids twitch. Jiuling, have you come for your grandson? The Grand Preceptor got straight to the point, his eyes extremely sharp. Yes and no. Duke Jiu smiled and said calmly. According to the laws of the Tang dynasty, all related personnel, including relatives, are to be excused during court discussions. Jiuling shouldn't be unaware of this. Of all the civil and military officials in the court, only the Grand Preceptor, the leader of the civil officials, could directly address Duke Jiuling as Jiuling. The two were both old officials of two dynasties, and they were also over 70 years old. Outwardly we do not avoid enmity, inwardly we do not avoid family. Duke Jiu smiled faintly. However, Wang Chong is your grandson. The Grand Preceptor's eyes were sharp as he stared at Duke Jiu. Zhongmi is still the same as before. She hasn't changed at all. Duke Jiu smiled faintly, dispelling the Grand Preceptor's attack like a spring breeze. The Grand Preceptor was a person of virtue and prestige. Even old and important officials like Jiang Yunrang and Yan Wenzhang, and even imperial princes like the King of Song and King Qi, had to be respectful to the Grand Preceptor. There was probably no one other than Duke Jiu who could call the Grand Preceptor in front of all the civil and military officials of the court. Although the matter of talas arose because of my mischievous grandson, it involved the very foundation of war and peace in the imperial court. Thus, even though Wang Chong is my grandson, he does not need to avoid it. Duke Jiu stretched out his cane and continued forward. In the royal court, everyone's gaze was focused on Duke Jiu. Duke Jiu walked very slowly but steadily. Looking at his figure, everyone felt a strange sense of harmony in their hearts. It was as if the spring rain was nourishing everything, silently merging with the entire world. The Grand Preceptor's face was ashen. This was no ordinary court dispute, but one that involved the very foundation of the struggle between civil and military officials. At a time like this, the person he least wished to see was Wang Jiuling. Jiuling also heard the Grand Preceptor's words just now. This time, Jiuling made an exception and left Four Quarters Embassy to step into the imperial court to say one thing: seek peace through war and peace will exist, but seek peace through peace and peace will perish. Thus, when this old subject was prime minister, when the eastern and western Turkic Khaganates invaded the border, even though we could have chosen to negotiate peace, this old subject still led the army to the Turkic steppe and routed the Turks. It was precisely because of this war that 10-some years of peace were won, and the Turks no longer dared to invade the border. The Arabs have never had any dealings with the empire. If we seek peace before a battle, the Arabs will become complacent and underestimate the Tang dynasty, leading to endless wars. Thus, for the sake of the long-term stability of the Tang dynasty and for the sake of the people of the world, this old subject believes that it is best to reinforce Talas as quickly as possible. After saying that, Duke Jiao straightened his back, flicked his sleeves, and bowed respectfully. The hall was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Duke Jiao was a virtuous and renowned minister of the Tang dynasty, the creator of a golden age. For someone of his status to speak these words was truly powerful and carried an extraordinary weight. This was not just his view on the Talas incident, but also his experience in governance that he had developed over his decades as prime minister. This was something that no one could deny. To deny Duke Jiao was to deny the golden age of the Tang dynasty and its current peace. For a time, the entire hall was deathly silent while everyone revealed expressions of contemplation. Even Yan Wenzheng, Zheng Qingli, Zhou Taiqin, and the others were silent and seemed to be lost in thought. Wonderful. Beneath the pillar, the king of Song gave a long sigh of relief. Not even he had expected Duke Jiao to leave Four Quarters Embassy and arrive at a time like this. The Grand Preceptor was an old minister of 2 emperors and possessed an extremely high status. Not even he, an imperial prince, had the right to speak to the Grand Preceptor. If not for Duke Jiao, the matter at Talas would have been settled and the army would have been withdrawn. The Tang dynasty's operations in the western regions would have been completely destroyed. The alliance between Arabia, Uzan, and the Western Turks would have been for naught, and all their previous efforts would have been for naught, bringing endless disasters. Damn old thing, you ruined my plans. At this moment, no one was more furious than King Qi. He gnashed his teeth, his expression incomparably resentful. He had originally believed that by borrowing the strength of the civil officials, he could completely suppress the king of Song and the Wang clan. He had not expected that a single Duke Jiao would immediately cause his plans to fail. The Grand Preceptor Zhang Zhongmi had a nasty grimace on his face. Jiuling, don't forget that you are a civil official. Zhang Zhongmi could not help but warn. In the most serious conflict between civil and military in the history of the Tang dynasty, the final twist had come not from the martial path, but from the civil path. Zhang Zhongmi had never imagined that this would happen. After so many years, Zhongmi was like this when I was with teacher. Why do you still not understand? Why do you still cling rigidly to the difference between civil and military? In Jiuling's heart, there is no distinction between civil and military, only the family and the country. Everything is for the sake of the Tang dynasty, the country, and the people. In Talas, only by seeking war can peace be achieved, and if peace is sought, only war will ensue. This is also why Jiuling supports the Northwest. Duke Jiao's voice was powerful and resonant, his expression slowly turning solemn. When one raises one's affairs, one does not avoid one's enemies, and when one raises one's affairs, one does not avoid one's relatives. In one's heart, there was no distinction between civil and military, and everything was for the sake of one's country. This was Duke Jiao. This was easy to say, but how many people could actually do it? Buzz. Duke Jiao's words caused the entire imperial court to buzz. The officials glanced at each other and began to chatter. They only knew that Duke Jiao and the Grand Preceptor both belonged to the civil path, but from Duke Jiao's words, it seemed like the two had once been classmates. This relationship left them all flabbergasted. Your Majesty, this old subject objects. Although the country is vast, warmongering is sure to perish. The Tang dynasty has spent an enormous amount of the nation's funds on successive wars. It is inadvisable to start another border war with Arabia. The Grand Preceptor sternly said, Your Majesty, this subject agrees with the Grand Preceptor. At this moment, a resounding voice rang out. Next to the coiling dragon pillar, King Qi's face chilled as he stepped forward and loudly agreed. Duke Jiao's words carried far too much weight in the imperial court. King Qi was worried that if he did not speak now, he would not have another chance. This subject agrees. This subject agrees. This subject agrees. Chapter 1045. Your Majesty, this subject objects. A resounding voice resounded through the hall. The King of Song, ceremonial tablet in hand, stepped out of the ranks, his expression solemn and respectful. "Your Majesty, this subject objects." "Your Majesty, this subject objects." "Your Majesty, this subject objects." The morale of the generals in the hall soared, and they stepped forward to respond to Duke Jiao and the King of Song. The generals and civil officials once more faced off against each other, and just when it seemed like they were about to clash, a voice rang out, "Enough! We have already made a decision." At this moment, a majestic voice, like that of a god from the 9 heavens, came from behind the beaded curtains of the hall. The sage emperor had finally spoken. "The King of Song, Zhangqiu Jianqiong, the two of you are fully in charge of this matter. Immediately mobilize the army to reinforce Talas." The memorials submitted by Gao Xianji and Qixi Protector General Wang Chong have all been approved. Zheng Qingli, Zhou Taiqin, the Bureau of Revenue will do everything in its power to cooperate. All money and grain must be delivered without delay. In addition, the other departments will do everything in their power to cooperate. It was just a few sentences, but every single one of them was like a gem. His words were powerful and resonant, and the entire world became incomparably silent at this moment. In the imperial court, the Grand Preceptor, King Qi, and all the civil officials were dumbfounded. No one had expected the Holy Emperor to use this method to end the dispute between civil and military officials. Duke Jiao faintly smiled, while the King of Song, Jiang Yunrang, and the other generals were ecstatic. A sovereign's words were not to be taken lightly. No matter how intense the conflict between civil and military officials was, as long as the Holy Emperor spoke, everything would be settled. "This subject will carry out the decree." All the generals in the hall respectfully acknowledged the decree. As for the civil officials, no matter how unwilling they were forced to lower their heads. The Holy Emperor never lightly expressed his opinion, but once he did, there was no room for change. "This old subject will carry out the decree." All the officials from the Bureau of Revenue and the civil officials acknowledged the decree. "Go." That rumbling voice was incomparably majestic, like thunder, reverberating throughout the hall. Following the Holy Emperor's order, the entire Tang dynasty was like a huge war machine, operating rapidly. Soldiers responded to the summons and prepared to reinforce Talas. Walala. Not long after the Holy Emperor appeared and the imperial court made its decision, a carrier pigeon flapped its wings and soared into the sky, flying toward Anshi with astonishing speed. Several days later, the messenger pigeon landed in the city of Talas. Rumble. It was like a heavy bomb had been dropped on the city, causing massive waves to ripple through the city. Great! In Talas, all the generals had gathered, their faces red with excitement. After so many days of stalemate, the imperial court had finally decided to send reinforcements to Talas. This was the best news they had heard in a while, and even Gao Xinji was alarmed and left his seclusion. Lord Protector General, with the support of the Holy Emperor and the imperial court, will be able to take the initiative in Talas. We might really be able to defeat the Arabs. In the hall, Anshi Vice Protector General Cheng Qianli rested his hands on the table, a look of joy on his face. The imperial court had been in a stalemate for far too long, and every major decision required a long time to be passed. Moreover, this was a major victory, so it would be extremely difficult to get the imperial court to send reinforcements based on past conventions. Cheng Qianli had even begun to think about what the Anshi Protectorate army would do if the imperial court took so long to make a decision. Indeed, it was absolutely unprecedented for the resolution to be passed so quickly. The King of Song, the Beacon General, and almost all the military officials of the court stand on our side. Even Duke Jiao has appeared. But this matter is far from optimistic. After his initial excitement, Gao Xinji calmed down and began to frown. The imperial court needs to defend far too many places, and in many places, a single move will affect the entire situation. It simply can't send many soldiers. I'm worried that even with the decree of the Holy Emperor, the imperial court won't be able to send many soldiers. Lord Protector General worries too much. I've already taken care of everything. We can transfer at least 20,000 soldiers from the capital. Together with the soldiers from the protectorates and a portion of the Xiong army, we can get 50 to 60,000 elites from the imperial court. Soldiers are valued for quality over quantity. Although we still can't compare to the Arabs, we can still put up a fight. Oh! The eyes of the generals brightened in surprise. Transferring soldiers from the protectorates along the border was not unexpected. In truth, this was something that Wang Chong and Gao Xianji had already agreed on. But for him to be able to mobilize nearly 20,000 soldiers from the capital was truly astonishing. Wang Chong, you want to transfer the imperial army? Gao Xianji suddenly thought of something and probed. Wang Chong grunted and gave a firm nod. Boom! This seemingly ordinary action instantly set off massive waves in the eyes of the generals. Even Gao Xianji and Cheng Qianli were stunned by Wang Chong's daring idea. The two of them looked at each other, shocked speechless. Transferring the imperial army. Such a thing had never happened in all of history. The imperial army was responsible for guarding the capital and protecting the emperor. It would never lightly leave. In the 200-some years since the founding of the Tang dynasty, the imperial army had already been transferred without moving its soldiers from the border. This was unprecedented. Although Gao Xianji and Cheng Qianli were supreme figures of the empire, they didn't even dare to think about such a thing. Wang Chong, are you sure? Will the imperial court agree? Lord Protector General, there is no precedent for this, but it is not impossible. The imperial court has 100,000 soldiers in the imperial army, and all the borders are garrisoned. The imperial court poses no threat. If you want to transfer elite soldiers, the imperial army is the best choice. Don't forget that Arabia has even dispatched the Mamluks, the Behemoth army, and the Skyquaking army. With all three Arab governors gathered in the future, ordinary soldiers won't be able to stop them. Wang Chong sternly said. But transferring the imperial army is no small matter. If we do this, we'll definitely be criticized by the officials. Moreover, neither the king of Song nor Zhangzhou Jianqiong have the authority to transfer the imperial army. Gao Xianji said. It wasn't that he didn't agree with Wang Chong, but that Wang Chong's idea was too crazy and daring. General doesn't even fear death, so why would you fear a scholar's brush? Wang Chong grinned. The Holy Emperor rarely interferes in the political affairs of the imperial court. The fact that the Holy Emperor has personally spoken is an enormous convenience. As long as you and I submit a joint petition, I am confident that His Majesty will agree. Wang Chong's words were light, but the contents of his proposal made Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, and all the other generals in the hall palpitate. Gao Xianji and Cheng Qianli looked at each other, speechless for a long time. Only Wang Chong remained calm and composed, his face unperturbed. The current structure of the Tang dynasty had nothing to do with the generals. The true leader was the distant Holy Emperor. The civil officials of the court accused the generals of being warlike, but the true warlike one was the Holy Emperor. It was precisely because of his support that the current structure and territory of the Tang dynasty had come into being. Gao Xianji and Cheng Qianli were still somewhat hesitant, but Wang Chong knew that as long as Talas spoke, the Holy Emperor would definitely agree. My lord, we only have one chance. If we don't do our best to mobilize soldiers now, once Talas is lost, it will be useless to mobilize the imperial army. Wang Chong observed Gao Xianji's expression and added the final piece of his bargaining chip. Upon hearing Wang Chong's final words, Gao Xianji's eyes flickered. He clenched his teeth and finally made up his mind. Qianli, I'll leave this matter to you and Protector General Wang. But if we do this, we'll have no path of retreat. The first part of his sentence was directed at Cheng Qianli, but the last part was directed at Gao Xianji and Wang Chong. Now that the imperial army was involved, the nature of the entire matter would be completely different. Once they were defeated, neither Wang Chong nor Gao Xianji would be able to advance in their official careers. There was no path of retreat in the first place. Wang Chong faintly smiled, not a hint of hesitation in his eyes. Everything was ready except for the east wind. For Wang Chong, there had been no path of retreat for a very long time. Flap flap. A few moments later, An eagle soared into the sky from Talas and flew toward the capital. The memorial drafted by Wang Chong, coordinated by Cheng Qianli, and stamped with Gao Xianji's seal quickly flew to the capital. Just as Wang Chong had predicted, Wang Chong's request to mobilize the imperial army caused massive waves in the capital. But before the civil officials of the court could impeach him, the Holy Emperor's decree left everyone dumbfounded. Permitted. It was a simple word, but it immediately suppressed all the arguments. A potential crisis had not even erupted, but it had already been eliminated without a trace. Although the imperial army had a special status, if the Holy Emperor gave the order to mobilize them, not even the civil officials of the court could say anything. And Wang Chong had requested in his memorial to mobilize 10,000 imperial army soldiers, exactly 1/10 of the imperial army. This was not a small number, but it was also not too much. It was the limit that the officials of the court could tolerate, and it would not have too great of an impact on the imperial army's duty to protect the capital. In the northwest of the capital, in a clean and elegant palace hall, a stalwart figure was seated cross-legged in meditation, his body exuding an aura that was like a tide. Behind him, a wood steel saber, more than 7 feet long, stood unmoving, accentuating the man's imposing figure. If one looked carefully, one would see that both the seated man and the 7-foot-long woozy steel saber were floating in the air. Anyone who could float in the air was at least a brigadier general. Quasi-commander-in-chief of the imperial army, Zhao Fengchen. Chapter 1046. Rumble. Zhao Fengchen's body rumbled as vast amounts of stellar energy madly surged through it, moving faster and faster. Zhao Fengchen's aura was also getting stronger and stronger. When the stellar energy reached its maximum speed, there was a heaven-shaking boom. In a flash, a vast amount of green energy surged out of Zhao Fengchen's head. Looking from afar, the cyan essence qi pierced through the roof of the palace, majestically connecting the entire world. That essence qi gave people a feeling of steel and iron, extremely heavy. Even the entire ground in the northwest corner of the palace was slightly trembling. After some time, that vast amount of energy slowly dissipated and everything returned to normal. At the same time, within the hall, Zhao Fengchen slowly opened his eyes. Alas, I was still lacking a little bit. A bright light flashed through Zhao Fengchen's eyes as he slowly retracted his energy and descended to the ground. Clang. Zhao Fengchen extended his palm, and the woozy steel saber on his back immediately buzzed as if it had a life of its own and returned to Zhao Fengchen's palm. Feeling the heavy weight of the saber in his hand, as well as the movement of the saber along with his breathing, a prideful smile appeared on Zhao Fengchen's face. Scar. This was the name of the woozy steel saber that Wang Chong had forged for him. The Zhao clan had an extremely powerful and ancient technique that had been passed down from generation to generation. Other than members of the Zhao clan, no one else was able to cultivate it. But even so, cultivating this ancient technique of the Zhao clan was filled with difficulties. In the Zhao clan, only those with a special bloodline had the right to cultivate it. And Zhao Fengchen was the only person in the last 100 years who had this right. But because this technique was so tyrannical, almost no saber or sword in the capital met Zhao Fengchen's requirements. The treasured sabers and swords of the great clans were unable to endure the tyrannical stellar energy and shattered before Zhao Fengchen could even cultivate half of the technique. He had only heard of the treasured sabers and swords of the capital being shattered, but he had never heard of them being shattered. One could easily imagine how tyrannical the technique that Zhao Fengchen cultivated was. This was the reason why Zhao Fengchen had been purchasing a large number of sabers and swords in the capital. Yet, the results left Zhao Fengchen disappointed again and again, until he met Wang Chong and this earth scar. It was due to this saber that Zhao Fengchen was able to break through his bottleneck and bring out his incredible talent in martial arts. In just a short year, he had advanced by leaps and bounds, reaching his current astounding level and becoming a grand marshal of the imperial army. Zhao Fengchen's gratitude toward Wang Chong was unimaginable. I'm afraid it'll take a long time before I can break through to the rank of general, Zhao Fengchen thought. He had reached the brigadier general level a long time ago, and after that he had put all his strength into breaking into the great general level. Alas, he had failed again and again. The gap between a great general and a peak brigadier general didn't seem very large, but Zhao Fengchen was well aware that reaching the great general level wasn't that simple. It wasn't something that could be achieved through hard work or thick stellar energy. Flap flap. As he was thinking, he suddenly heard the flapping of wings. With a single thought from Zhao Fengchen, without any movement, the door to the hall immediately opened, and a black eagle flew in. "It's a letter from the Grand Marshal." Zhao Fengchen glanced at the eagle, a thought flitting through his mind as he opened the letter on its leg. Zhao Fengchen glanced at it, and after a moment of surprise, he gave a knowing smile. "Wang Chong, it seems like we'll be meeting very soon." Zhao Fengchen faintly smiled as he walked out of the hall. "Pass on my order. All soldiers of the Xuanwu army, prepare to move out." A moment later, following Zhao Fengchen's orders, the most unique unit of the 100,000 Imperial Army soldiers in the royal capital began to move. Rumble. Several hours later, the west gate of the Imperial Palace, the two doors that had never been opened before, suddenly opened with a loud bang. Immediately after, the earth trembled like sifting chaff, as if many invisible giant hands were hitting the ground. In the blink of an eye, a black tide surged out from behind the massive gate, the tens of thousands of black-armored Imperial soldiers howling out. Unlike the other Imperial soldiers, the armor of this unit was of a different design. It exuded a dignified, solemn, and incomparably heavy aura. Each set of armor seemed to be at least twice as heavy as the other Imperial soldiers. Just wearing this set of armor would require an enormous amount of energy, and there was no need to even mention fighting. But these black-armored Imperial soldiers seemed to feel nothing. Rumble. 8,000 black-armored Imperial soldiers rode out of the gate. At that moment, the world fell silent. Birds and beasts disappeared, and even the bugs on the ground seemed to bury themselves, not daring to make a sound. How come I've never seen this Imperial army before? What a powerful aura. These fellows are very formidable. Shoo! Don't say anything. Can't you see the look in their eyes? The peddlers and commoners who saw this sight cried out in alarm and began to back away. After living in the capital for so long, everyone knew the Imperial army of the Imperial Palace like the back of their hands. But no one had ever seen this unit of the Imperial army before. They had never even heard of it before. But despite the clamor of the crowd, the 8,000 black-armored Imperial soldiers maintained absolute silence. As they advanced, not a single sound could be heard other than the galloping of their horses. Bzz. In just a few moments, the 8,000 black-armored Imperial soldiers had vanished from the city like ghosts. At the same time, on the Imperial Heaven Pillar Mountain, 100 li from the capital. Rumble! At the back of the mountain, a hidden stone door opened. A moment later, an army of more than 4,000 people slowly walked out of the mountain. These 4,000 soldiers had pale faces, but their bodies exuded a storm of energy that was as sharp as an unsheathed sword. If one were to look carefully, one would discover that with every step those people took, they would leave behind deep blade and sword scars. Moreover, these 4,000 soldiers all had the same aura. It was clear that they were undergoing the same training and cultivating the same technique. The 4,000 soldiers all had the same expression on their faces as if they were one person, and they exuded an indescribable, intimidating aura. It didn't take long for all 4,000 soldiers to gather and remain motionless. Soldiers are trained for 1,000 days to be used in a single moment. I presume that all of you understand what today represents. Wang Chang's little uncle, Wang Mi, stood at the stone door, his eyes sweeping over the faces of the soldiers. 8 months have passed. Now is the time for all of you to come out and test your skills. It is time for all of you to show the world and the enemy your abilities. Do you understand? The loud and clear voice resounded in the air above the entire mountain. Yes. The 4,000 soldiers got down on one knee and lowered their heads in unison. Bzz. Buzz. The air trembled, and in the instant that the 4,000 people shouted, their auras merged together like 100 rivers flowing into the ocean. And above the 4,000 soldiers, the essence qi converged and formed the phantom of a huge broadsword over 10 zhang tall. The broadsword was incomparably large and sharp, so sharp that it seemed as if it could split the world in half. Wang Mi nodded in satisfaction at this scene. Wang Mi recalled something that Wang Chong had told him a long time ago when they first started training this army. "Little uncle, this army is very important to me. This scroll contains their cultivation technique. After you take it, have them practice it day and night. Don't touch any other cultivation technique. I hope that in the future, we can train a new type of army in this world. At some important occasion, I will use them. Little uncle, please." In that scene, Wang Chong stood in front of a bamboo forest, his expression unprecedentedly solemn. At that moment, Wang Mi seemed to be infected and involuntarily nodded his head. At the time, Wang Mi still didn't understand what Wang Chong meant. It was only much later, when Wang Mi had trained this army to a certain level and even participated in their training, that Wang Mi finally understood what Wang Chong meant. Wang Mi had actually handed over a powerful troop with especially sharp offensive power to him for him to train in High Emperor Heavenly Pillar Mountain. And now, it was finally time to reap the fruits. Wang Mi took in a deep breath and quickly regained his composure. "Prepare armor for them. In 3 days, prepare to set out." Wang Mi said without turning his head. "Yes, my lord." An instructor of the Heavenly Pillar Mountain replied. Several hours later, the 4,000 troops were all neatly dressed. Like a storm, they swept down from the Pillar of Heaven's mountains and headed northwest. "Chong, this is as far as your uncle can help you. I've already finished training this divine prison army for you. Consider it a gift from your uncle. The rest is up to you." Halfway up the mountain, Wang Mi gazed at the departing army for a long time. Time slowly passed, and as the 8,000 black-armored Xuanwu army trained by Zhao Fengchen and Li Lin and the 4,000 divine prison army trained by Wang Chong's little uncle set out for the western regions, the entire capital fell silent. While everyone was fast asleep, few people knew that in a certain place in the capital, outside the most special and revered Su residence of the Tang dynasty, more than 4,000 people dressed in simple clothes were silently waiting with their heads lowered. This residence had more than 100 years of history, and many places were already showing signs of decay. However, for the military and all the soldiers, this was a true holy land. This was where the legendary war god So Yong-sun of the Tang dynasty resided. As the night deepened, the air began to chill. The 4,000 people dressed in thin clothes remained motionless, afraid that they would disturb that person in the residence. Even the sound of everyone's breathing was suppressed. When the cold wind blew, there was no sound at all. He stood outside the wall for an unknown amount of time. Finally, "Come in." An elderly voice came from the residence. It was flat and indifferent, like any other old man on the street. Along with that old voice, the side door of the Su mansion suddenly opened. Among the 4,000 people, a few figures finally couldn't help but raise their heads. Their faces were flushed and their eyes were filled with excitement and agitation. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.